Another bombshell in the Sean Diddy Combs trial as a new alleged victim took the stand, backing up Cassie Ventura's claims and making some new ones of her own. This former assistant broke down on the stand, claiming she was sexually abused by Diddy and described how she was allegedly controlled and humiliated by the man who employed her. I'm Kennedy Walker, and you're watching Law and Crime. This courtroom sketch shows the woman who arguably delivered some of the most harrowing testimony yet in the federal trial against Sean Combs. Her face is intentionally left blank. This is because her identity is being shielded from the public. Only the jurors know her real name. To the public, she's known as Mia. Mia worked as Combs' personal assistant for 8 years. On the stand, she gave a detailed account of what she says happened behind the scenes. She told the jury she lived in fear, saying she didn't feel safe telling Diddy no. Mia backed up Cassie Ventura's claims of abuse, testifying, quote, "I've seen him attack her. I've seen him throw her on the ground. I've seen him crack her head open." She recalled one violent episode where she feared for Cassie's life, saying, quote, "I just saw him pick her up, and I thought he is actually going to kill her. He slammed her head into the corner of the bed." But the most emotional part of Mia's testimony was what she says Combs did to her. She claimed the abuse began just months after she was hired. It was Combs' 40th birthday party in New York. She told the court he handed her 2 shots that, in her words, hit her hard. Then she said he kissed her and put his hand up her dress. Mia described another incident, this time inside Diddy's Los Angeles mansion. She told jurors that house rules forbade her from locking her bedroom door. Diddy, she claimed, would often say, quote, "This is my house. No one locks my doors." One night, she said she woke up to find him on top of her and alleged that he raped her. She said she couldn't say no to him because no meant risking everything. Testifying, quote, "I couldn't tell him no about a sandwich. I couldn't tell him no about anything." The prosecution asked, "What were you afraid would happen if you told Mr. Combs no with regard to sex?" Mia responded that he would fire me and ruin my future and somehow twist the story into making me look like a threat. In another alleged incident, she said Diddy forcibly slammed her arm into a door after she chased him down for taking her phone. When she found him later, Mia testified that he said, "I sent all of your compromising and inappropriate photos to my phone just in case you ever have something on me." Mia's testimony echoed Cassie's, who also accused Diddy of years of abuse. 2 women, 2 nearly identical stories. Both say they were sexually assaulted by Sean Combs. Both described a man who was allegedly violent and controlling. And both took the stand in his federal trial. Mia testified that Diddy, quote, "treated me like I was a worthless piece of crap." She said she was constantly cursed out, humiliated, and berated. Cassie told the jury she felt humiliated and disgusting. When asked why she didn't come forward, Mia told prosecutors, quote, "I was going to die with this. I didn't want anyone to know, ever." 2 women speaking up. 2 voices, once silenced, now heard in the same courtroom. And joining me to talk more about this is former Deputy Public Defender Philip Dubé. Philip, thank you so much for coming on today.
Bless you for having me.
So let's just dive right in. How important is Mia's testimony in this trial?
Oh, are you kidding? She's the linchpin, or at least one of them, because remember, he is charged with RICO, which is the Racketeering, Influence, Organized Corruption, etc. Act. And they basically have to show a pattern of predicate criminal activity. So the one-off, the isolated incidents won't bring it to that level of it being a racket, if you will, under federal law to get Diddy. So they have to basically show a pattern. And a lot of people don't know this, and even a lot of attorneys and judges, but the definition of a racket is where you commit a crime more than once. So in theory, if you commit a crime twice, you're a racketeer. It's kind of hard to believe, but normally you associate it with repeated, ongoing criminality under the umbrella of some type of an enterprise. So what these 2 women are doing between Cassie and Mia is showing that this is not just a one-off. This is not an isolated incident. These incidents now are starting to stack, which makes it starting to look like the ordinary course of the business. And I'm telling you right now, it's not looking good for Diddy.
So let's just talk more about that with, Mia's specific testimony. How is that proving RICO or sex trafficking? The alleged sexual assault, or is it, the alleged physical violence? Her not going to HR because she's saying that HR wasn't really a thing at his company. Like, from what she's saying, how does it prove it?
Well, in a civil context, she could just file a sexual harassment lawsuit or go out on workers' comp, and that would be easy to settle. I mean, I know plenty of attorneys out there who would be salivating over those types of lawsuits, and they would try to get in on the payday. But criminally, I got to tell you, the government's a little handcuffed because the stateside local prosecutors in the DA's office never filed charges. And all of those crimes are time barred because they go back so many years. I mean, these young ladies started getting beaten, back in 2010, 2011. Domestic violence alone has a 4-year statute of limitations in California. And even if you try to get him on let's say, a pimping and pandering theory, I think it's an 8-year statute. So those crimes are long gone. You can't get them. So what do? You go federally, and federally, if you can show and basically 2 or more incidents of these predicate acts, be it assault, be it rape, be it arson, brandishing a firearm in somebody's face, these types of criminal threats and wielding weapons, that's how you build a case. But standing alone, if all you have is just isolated acts of violence, what this pattern tends to show with weapons and all types of veiled threats is that it was accomplished by force, fraud, or coercion. The force, fraud, or coercion is an element of the RICO statute. Absent that, the jury cannot convict.
So we can say, okay, we need 2 or more predicate acts. So that could, essentially be Cassie Ventura's testimony when she went on the stand and said that Diddy allegedly raped her, Diddy allegedly hit her. And then now we have Mia's testimony essentially saying the exact same thing, that Mr. Combs allegedly sexually assaulted her, hit her, and the force and coercion, all of those things. We just proved RICO right there, essentially, is what you're saying.
Right. I mean, if all you had was just Cassie standing alone, basically what Diddy, and I would defend him on it. I absolutely would. I'd go to New York pro bono because I think it would be improperly charged under the RICO statute. Really, what he is then on that fact pattern is a domestic batterer. And certainly not trying to trivialize it, but there's a separate body of law to get him under. You get him for spousal battery or domestic violence or just ordinary assault and battery. But because everybody sat on the clock and let the time tick away, they can't get him stateside. So you have to go federal. So now what do? You show that it's not just one victim within the Combs orbit. You start bringing in other people like personal assistants, other employees, maybe vendors of the Combs enterprise, people who are performing services for the enterprise, the plumber, the electrician, the hairdresser, the makeup artist. When you start looping in all these people who are saying these people are getting beaten, they're getting pistol whipped, they're getting threatened, their livelihood is on the line, then it really starts to look like a criminal racket. And now what we're starting to see is it going from the infancy stage into it ripening into a true racket. And I'm sure right now, Diddy is shaking in his boots because the man is looking at life if convicted.
Right. And so we just talked about Cassie and Mia having similar testimonies with the sexual assault. Also, with physical assault, we know that the former stylist said that Diddy physically hit him, allegedly. We know Mia said that she was physically hit. Cassie said she was physically hit. All of this alleged. So now it's like you could break that down for each thing could be like that, right?
Yeah. And you know what's even scarier, Kennedy? And a lot of people don't know this. And this is actually kind of terrifying. The prosecution does not have to prove each predicate act beyond a reasonable doubt. So the jury doesn't get a special verdict form while deliberating as to whether or not they find the sexual assault's true, the threats true, the coercion true. They don't have to find any of that true. All they have to find is that, I guess, under the totality of the circumstances, predicate acts have been proven. That's it. And you don't even have to have unanimity on them. So if you just throw a bunch of predicate acts at the jury sort of in a vacuum and not even necessarily in isolation, but where they can kind of look at it all in combination, the jury can come back with a guilty. It's pretty frightening. And the prosecution is not bound by the statute of limitations for each predicate act. So remember, under state law, the DV or the Domestic Violence Acts, here in California, you got to get to the courthouse within 4 years of the crime, or that charge is time barred. But under federal RICO law, they can claw back decades. They can claw back 10 years outside the state statute of limitations and lump it in as a predicate act as long as the RICO itself is filed on time. So it's pretty scary how far back prosecutors can go. It's almost as if you have to watch your back from adolescence all the way to death as a citizen of this country out of fear that someone's just going to kind of glob onto something you did years ago and hold it against you at a federal criminal trial. It's pretty scary stuff.
And usually we know, I've seen defense attorneys say, well, hey, there's no physical evidence, so it can't be proved. There was no rape kit. There was no DNA. But in this case, they don't need that, correct?
They don't need any of it. It's all credibility. If the jury believes these witnesses, that's enough. I think they even get a special jury instruction that says that they can convict on the testimony of one eyewitness. So in theory, they don't even need this menagerie of witnesses to come in to testify about everything that Combs did to these people. If you have one person who says, for example, let's say it's Mia, and Mia comes in and says, I saw Sean Diddy do this to so-and-so. I saw him or heard him threaten her life. I heard him take a knife or saw him take a knife on this day. In theory, they don't even have to bring in all those people. They can just present it through one witness. But practically speaking, juries really need to hear from everybody, because at some point the prosecution will start to lose credibility, and it's going to look like that they are ganging up on him really without the goods. And juries, especially nowadays, they don't have a hard time convicting, but a lot of them really do have a conscience. And they want to make sure that they are convicting people based on rock solid evidence and not on hearsay. And unfortunately, you can convict of a RICO violation based on hearsay. It's sad, but true.
Is it dogpiling, though, or is it just that Mr. Combs has been in business for decades and decades, and maybe there are this many victims?
Of course. And I don't want to minimize what he did to anybody. Don't get me wrong. But, there's an old expression, not just in law, but in the literature, that we are not defined by the sum of our worst day. In other words, just because you have a couple of bad days in life, maybe spread out biannually, annually, does that really define who you are as an individual? Because what's interesting, when you look at some of the evidence of the women involved in Diddy's world, you see them smiling at Burning Man. You see them giving the peace sign at parties. You see them hugging. You see them kissing. So it wasn't all bad. The problem is that when it goes from the good and morphs into the bad, it literally goes from that old, I don't know if you remember the comedy tragedy masks that we see in theater arts, but that's what it does. And it just flips like with absolutely no notice, where he just goes from like this healthy, normal affect to almost like this manic craziness. And it puts people in fear for their lives. And if he's doing all of this under the umbrella of the Combs enterprise, unfortunately, this man's looking at life.
And you bring up a good point there with, some of the victims appearing in photos with Mr. Combs looking happy. Some people may ask, why didn't she leave? Or why didn't she say something sooner? From a legal standpoint, how do prosecutors handle that kind of victim blaming? Because there was a moment when Mia did say why. She did say, she couldn't even say no to a sandwich. So that's why she couldn't say no to Mr. Combs. But on the other hand, could the defense argue, well, you worked for him for 8 years?
The practical reality is, Kennedy, that just about every juror has had to work for somebody else in life. I'm not going to say that all jurors are self-employed, that they're the captain of their own ship, but they understand what it means to have to respect to respect authority in the workplace and have to work for other people. And they are 100% dependent on their employer to keep their job open, keep the paycheck going. And sometimes people don't have the means, they don't have the contacts, and they might not even have the will to find other employment. So they feel trapped. And when you feel trapped, it means you have to endure what's being perpetrated on you by a taskmaster for a boss. And at some point, it morphs from being an employer-employee relationship almost to indentured servitude. And there's no way out. And our laws proscribe indentured servitude, peonage, and trafficking. And that's what happens. And then there's an entire pathology, particularly in the romantic relationships, why people stay in these relationships. And it goes back to this entire, I don't know if I necessarily want to call it a sickness, but it's this cycle of human tolerance, human forgiveness, and yet there is also a limit. But when people reach the limit and your abuser or your oppressor comes back and tries to make good and make up for what they've done, then you fall back into that cycle and you start reliving the drama all over again. And then it goes back to that comedy drama type cycle where things are good again. And then there's this sort of brief pause, and then the violence starts up again. And at some point, it's crazy making. But they're trapped because they can't just leave and make a life for themselves without having to become impoverished. And that's the fear. We see that, for example, with battered spouses. We even see it with battered children. They're too young to get out of a house. They're too young to go truant maybe, or be afraid to run away. They have nowhere to go. Cops won't listen to them. Neighbors won't listen to them. Instead, they just bring them back to that same violent environment. And at some point, you don't know what to do. Now, in this case, fortunately, women left and they did eventually get out. And thank goodness they did, because Lord only knows if they would have survived it.
Right. And you touch on the emotion there. And I think that that's very important because several of these witnesses have cried on the stand. We saw it with Cassie, with Capricorn Clark, and now Mia. Mia testified that she was going to die with this secret. Can powerful lines like that impact how a jury feels and ultimately rules?
Absolutely. Because remember, one of the elements is force, fraud, or coercion. And if these witnesses / victims are truly feeling the wrath of Diddy through force, fraud, or coercion, then the jury can convict. So far, I think they've made out the predicate acts, and these witnesses have made a compelling case in front of the jury that it was all done by coercion. It's not looking good for Diddy. I got to tell you. I don't know what that offer was before the trial started, but it's probably looking pretty good right now. And he might be having second thoughts about not having taken it.
Well, how does the defense go about combating this testimony?
Well, look, I don't think that it's difficult for jurors to see that not every relationship is perfect. And you're not condoning what Diddy did, for lack of a better term, but that you argue to the jury that everything is improperly filed. He is not charged with domestic violence. So you're not telling the jury that your client is a Vienna choir boy. And you're certainly not asking the jury to invite him over for Sabbath dinner, or to set a Seder plate for him, But that's not what's before them. What is before them is to see whether or not there was no consent, and whether or not this was in fact done by force, fraud, or coercion. And it's pretty scary how you can be in a relationship and things are hot and cold, emotions ebb and flow, there are highs and lows, but then suddenly you're behind the V, as we say in a criminal case, where if a victim says, yes, yes, it's good, but then if they change and say, no, no, you're a criminal. And I think the test for the jury is going to be whether or not these quote unquote victims really did consent. And if in Diddy's mind, he reasonably believed that they consented, because that's the standard. Did he reasonably believe that they consented? And if he reasonably believed that, the burden shifts to the federal government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did not consent. And you never know, he really might be able to hang it. My fear is, though, that he would probably have to testify and explain to the jury why his beliefs were reasonable at the time. And certainly he would have to fall on the sword and explain that he wasn't the greatest partner, he probably wasn't the greatest boss, but that he wasn't a racketeer or a trafficker.
Well, when you say there's some things maybe Mr. Combs didn't realize, could it be argued with Mia taking the stand and in her own words saying that she did not say no? Could the defense say, well, how was Mr. Combs supposed to know otherwise?
Absolutely, because there's a doctrine in the law, we call it assertive conduct. Okay, assertive conduct means that people can consent and acquiesce and agree and just by way of their conduct. So in theory, you can go to a bar, hang out, you spot somebody that you're interested in without actually voicing the words, hey, you want to come home with me? Instead, what you do, you're buying each other a drink, you're hugging, maybe even planting a kiss on each other. And before you know it, you're walking out to the car, you're getting into the car, and you're going over to their place. But does that mean that it was articulated? No. So you look at the behavior. The behavior suggests that there's consent. You don't see anybody pulling away. You don't see anybody slapping the other person, saying, take your hands off me, or, I'm not that type of person. I'm not interested. No. So you look at the behavior and you watch it just sort of flow and move almost like a medley. And you say to yourself, how else could you interpret this? This looks like an act of consent. Now, you might not like what went down during, the course of everything, but you never once tried to back out. You never once said, no, I want out. And if they did, and midstream did try to get out, and Diddy continued anyway, that's a sexual assault. That is rape. Just like yes means yes, no also means no. Even if you're in the heat of things and you are midstream and your victim says stop, no more, and you do not stop, that is a predicate act under RICO. But let's just pretend hypothetically that nobody ever said stop. But instead, they're just thinking it. Oh, I wish he would get off of me. I wish he would just stop already. Why doesn't he just die? Get away from me. But you don't voice it. You don't articulate it. The man is not the great Karnak. He's not a mind reader. And now to come after him 15 years later and call him a trafficker, a racketeer, a rapist, I think a jury might have a hard time. I really do. To be fair.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Mia's argument just that she was just too afraid and thought that he would ruin her life and ruin her career if she said no. She said he was a very powerful man, so she just felt voiceless, essentially. But some people compare Mia's story to what we saw in the Weinstein case. Do you think this case is headed in that direction legally?
I don't see it as the Weinstein case. I see it a little different. I almost see it like the Epstein, Ghislaine, Maxwell type scenario.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Absolutely.
Right? You know what I mean? Where Ghislaine is kind of looking for people, grooming them, bringing them, to the leader, to the mob boss, if you will, And then, but I think the distinction between Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein is that I don't believe that Jeffrey ever victimized Ghislaine. Instead, he always rewarded her. They were literally like thick as thieves, kind of partners in crime. Whereas here, I think what you've got, it's a little different. You've got everybody intimately involved on a daily basis in an employment situation, as opposed to just purely a party situation. And that employment sort of umbrella is what kind of triggers the enterprise aspect of RICO. And I think the jury can infer, well, look, this guy's running a business. He's got people in his employ. He's victimizing them. He's putting them in indentured servitude in a form of peonage. Yeah, he might be paying them a pittance, but he's doing it by force, fraud, or coercion. That's called a racket. So it could go either way, I think. But I will tell you that the more victims that they have coming in, the more insurmountable it will be for Diddy. But when you have one or two people, you could be able to argue it as maybe people who are disgruntled. They were the hopeful sort of monkey wannabe starlets, R&B singers, agents, people from the music world who really thought that they were going to be titans and dynamos, only to have their hopes dashed because Diddy dumped them. And now they get to come in and have the last word, take that stand and take down Diddy. And I think that's how you play it. But that can only work, I think, if you only have a couple of people. And it remains to be seen who else they have coming in to take the stand who was victimized by him. Because the more you have, the more insurmountable it becomes.
Right. And we have weeks more. So we are definitely going to be following this
Yeah.
case very closely to see what happens. Philip, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Kennedy. Have a great weekend.
Sean Combs denies all allegations. For all of the Diddy trial coverage, you can watch our live shows every weekday at 12 noon Eastern and continue to follow our uploads right here on the Law and Crime YouTube channel. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedy Walker.
We are entering week 4 of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial, and there is one name that has come up quite a bit. Not only someone who may know quite a few things about the rap mogul, but someone who may be the key to this whole racketeering case. Will Christina Courtroom, Combs' alleged right-hand woman, testify? And what could she say exactly? Well, we're going to dive into what other witnesses have said about her so far and her alleged role in this whole saga. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, listen up. This is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots or were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Christina Courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs' reported former chief of staff. Now, she might not have testified in his criminal trial as of yet, but she's got to, right? I mean, in a prostitution, sex trafficking, especially a racketeering case like this, where prosecutors allege that Combs operated this criminal enterprise that engaged in a pattern of illegal activities for his benefit, and that he used his company resources and his staff to carry out crimes and cover them up, Courtroom has to be a central witness who's going to testify for the government, right? Don't you need to explain the inner workings of this operation? Particularly if you charge Combs with racketeering conspiracy, right? This criminal agreement that he criminally agreed to further racketeering activity. He can't do it by himself. The natural question becomes, based on what has been said in court so far about Christina Courtroom, is she a co-conspirator who's now going to testify against him? Has she been granted protection to do so? And to think about that, his former chief of staff, someone who has been described as his right-hand person, testifying against him, isn't that going to be devastating? That is what we're going to discuss, and how she's already been brought up so many times in this trial so far. It is fascinating because the name Christina Courtroom has already come up quite a bit since the Combs legal saga began. She has been mentioned in several lawsuits against the rap mogul and even named as a defendant in some of them too. For instance, a woman named Ashley Parham filed a suit claiming she was violently gang raped by comedian Drewski, NFL star Odell Beckham, and violently assaulted with a remote by Sean Combs. And in that lawsuit, as far as Courtroom, it says, quote, defendant KK told defendant Diddy that she did not think giving plaintiff a Glasgow smile would be advantageous to their potential clients who they could sell plaintiff for sex to. Defendant KK then made a threat to plaintiff that they could ship her off anywhere in the world and that she would never see her family or anyone she knew ever again. There was also an accusation that Combs had forced Christina Courtroom to use a syringe to insert an IUD into Parham. And apparently, she and Combs argued over it, not over actually doing it, but that it wasn't going to work. Really weird allegation, but a serious allegation nonetheless. And that's not the only lawsuit that she's been named in as a defendant. She was named in another suit that was filed by a series of plaintiffs, and they claim that she, quote, aided Combs in his abuse of men and women and covered up sexual assaults. She was also reportedly mentioned in other lawsuits, like one that was filed by a former employee who claims that Courtroom would order him to clean up hotel rooms after Combs' wild sex parties. And maybe most famously, and the first time I personally heard of her name, was when she was named as a defendant in the lawsuit brought by Combs' former producer, Rodney Lil Rod Jones, who claims sexual harassment, violation of the racketeering statute. He claims Christina Coram manages the day-to-day of Combs' alleged criminal and sex trafficking enterprise, and basically made the allegation that she was like the Ghislaine Maxwell of this operation. Obviously a reference to the associate of deceased financier Jeffrey Epstein. Ghislaine Maxwell ended up getting convicted of sex trafficking charges and sentenced to 20 years in prison. And by the way, I'll tell you what, as reported by The Hollywood Reporter, Combs seemingly highlighted Christina Coram in a 2021 Facebook post, writing, "KK keeps everything in my life and my business running. She's been my right hand for the last 8 years and has consistently proven to execute and get S done. Don't know how I'd function without her." Now, a few months back, Coram released a statement that was published by USA Today, first reported by Rolling Stone, and she said the following: "For months, horrific accusations have been made about me in various lawsuits regarding my former boss. These false allegations of my involvement are causing irreparable and incalculable damage to my reputation and the emotional well-being of myself and my family. I have never condoned or aided and abetted the sexual assault of anyone, nor have I ever drugged anyone. The idea that I could be accused of playing a role in or even being a bystander to the rape of anyone is beyond upsetting, disturbing, and unthinkable. That is not who I am, and my heart goes out to all victims of sexual assault. I am confident that the allegations against me will be proven to be untrue." Now, to be clear, while those specific allegations in the civil lawsuits haven't come up in the criminal trial, she has come up in a lot of ways already during testimony in Sean Combs' criminal case, which again makes me wonder, will she testify for the prosecution? Is it possible that she can actually help the defense? Give an example. Give an example of an idea of how she's come up so far and her potential value as a witness. So Combs' former assistant, George Kaplan, testified about Christina Coram. "Who did you personally report to when you were Mr. Combs' assistant?" "I reported to Christina Coram, who is the director of his office." "Do you recognize the person in that photograph?" "Yes." "Who is that?" "Christina Coram." "The same Christina Coram you were just talking about?" "Yes." "Do you know her by any other names?" "KK." "What was her role within Combs Enterprises?" "She was the director of Mr. Combs' executive office." "So what were her job responsibilities?" "She essentially ran Mr. Combs' life." And more specifically, with respect to the charges that Combs faces, remember prosecutors are saying that women like Cassandra Ventura were forced into elaborate, prolonged sexual performances known as freak-offs with commercial sex workers that happened in various places, in various hotel rooms, and that Combs had his people prepare the rooms and clean them up afterwards. So if we accept that these are essentially crime scenes, listen to what Kaplan said on the stand. "Who usually instructed you to set up a hotel room for Mr. Combs?" "Either Mr. Combs himself or Christina." "When you say Christina, do you mean Christina Coram?" "Yes." A lot more to get into. I want to bring in right now former Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Arenberg, who hosts Legal AF, which is part of the Midas Touch Network. Dave, so good to have you on here. Am I wrong? She's got to be called. She's got to be called as a witness in this case, no?
Absolutely. I mean, when you said that she was referred to as Diddy's right hand, it was Diddy who said that. So yeah, she has to. And it is very telling that she has not been charged with any crime. Why do you think? I mean, if she is allegedly the Ghislaine Maxwell to Diddy in this case, why has she not been charged like Ghislaine Maxwell? Well, I would think it's because she's already cut a deal with prosecutors. Otherwise, I think it'd be game on, and she would be in the prosecutor's crosshairs. So I do expect that she is cooperating, at least in some way, with the prosecution, and I do think she will appear at trial.
How do you think specifically she would prove racketeering or help prove racketeering or criminal enterprise? How would she prove the sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura? How would she help prove transportation to engage in prostitution, transporting alleged victims and sex workers with the intent that they engage in prostitution and sex work? What are some of the things you think she'd be called to testify about?
When you have to prove racketeering, you've got to prove an ongoing criminal enterprise, not some ad hoc thing that you do with your friends and acquaintances, an enterprise. Well, if you're going to say that Diddy's record company is part of this criminal enterprise, you have to call employees of that company. Who better than Diddy's right hand? She knows, metaphorically speaking, where all the bodies are buried. So when it comes to racketeering, whether there were two predicate crimes, she can provide evidence. She can provide evidence that this is an ongoing criminal operation. And yes, she can provide evidence on the other count of human trafficking to show that Diddy allegedly harbored, transported, in other ways, created this this system of force, fraud, and abuse that led these individuals like Cassie to perform sex acts for money. And that's what happened. When you talk about human trafficking, it's a commercial sex act and you need force, fraud, or coercion. Well, that's what we're talking about here, and that's the evidence that this witness can provide.
So it came out during testimony that Homeland Security, HSI, they seized a cell phone of Christina Courtroom on September 16, 2024 at the Park Hyatt Hotel when Combs was ultimately arrested. That's got to be quite telling. A very interesting piece of evidence.
Oh, man, you don't want the authorities to have your phone, right? The phone tells all. I mean, so many cases we've seen where there are new charges that come after the authorities get your phone. And so, yes, so you think you would have to assume that the authorities know everything that KK knows. That's what Diddy calls her. And that's why the fact that she has not been charged tells me that she has been cooperating. She could be called as a rebuttal witness by the feds, or she could, as you said, and perhaps she'll be called as a defense witness. That is perilous, though, because if she lies on the stand, that could result in a perjury charge. Even if she cut a deal with prosecutors for immunity, that doesn't cover perjury. So it is a minefield if you call her to the stand as part of the defense. I think perhaps the prosecution has her lying in wait in case they need her as a rebuttal witness.
So I'm going to get into a minute all the times, or a lot of the times, that she was mentioned already in testimony, and kind of give us a preview of what she might testify to and how she might be used by the prosecution and the defense. But real quick, as a point of law, the allegations that she's facing in the civil lawsuits, whether she's named as a defendant or not, you think any of that is going to come up in the criminal case against Sean Combs?
Well, it could. I mean, it's fair game if she's called to the stand. The accusations against her can come in. I mean, if she testifies against Diddy, Diddy's people can tear her apart by pointing the finger at her. They can try to make her into the bad guy, into her as the one who is trying to save her own hide by coming up with these lies. She's the one being sued, and she's going to say anything to get out of it. So that's the kind of thing you could see if she does turn on Diddy. On the other hand, the fact that she's been sued by various people and with really salacious allegations, yeah, that is something that's going to hang over her head. And that is something that Diddy can use against her if she is called by the prosecution as a rebuttal witness.
I want to talk a little bit about how she was already brought up during the course of this trial. So I mentioned George Kaplan. So he testified that he was a witness to the abuse of Cassandra Ventura, victim number one in this case. Prosecutors say that Combs used violence, threats, financial control, intimidation, manipulation to coerce her into commercial sex acts, right? Sex trafficking. And Kaplan said that one time he was on a private plane, heard glass shattering, and he sees Sean Combs holding up a whiskey glass over his head. Cassie's on the floor. Her hands are in front of her face. He also said he observed Combs throw green apples at another girlfriend of his in his Miami home. So this pattern of abusing women, important for racketeering. And this is the back and forth question. What did you tell KK? I gave her a recount of what I had observed the night before. Did you tell her everything you have just told us? Yes. What, if anything, did you tell her about what you had observed on the jet involving Cassie? I had told her each time that I witnessed any sort of violent act. Did you tell KK about the incident on the jet? Yes. Do you remember being asked about the conversation you had that next day with Christina Courtroom? Yes. Did you tell her about both of these incidents during that conversation? No. Which incident did you tell her about? The green apple incident. And earlier, had you told her about the incident on the jet? Yes. What did you tell her about why you decided to quit working for Mr. Combs during that conversation? I think the words I used were that I was unwilling to stand by the behavior. What behavior were you talking about in the context of that conversation with Christina? The green apples and the airplane incident. Did you tell Christina you were going to quit because of that? Yes. Did Christina say she was going to quit too? No. Did Christina, as far as you know, quit any time after you left? No. As far as you know, how long did Christina stay working for Mr. Combs after you told her about these two incidents that shook you tremendously? I haven't spoken to her in a while, but my understanding was that she was working for him up until pretty recently. Dave, what does that tell you?
Tells you, allegedly, she was in on the whole thing. I mean, she seems to be the one employee that hasn't broken from Diddy, that hasn't been attacked or threatened. And why is that? Because allegedly she has been carrying out Diddy's criminal enterprise. That's what the government, I'm sure, believes. But why hasn't she been charged? Because she knows so much she could sink Diddy. So I think that's why. Or maybe if they haven't cut a deal with her, they're waiting to charge her afterwards, like Ghislaine Maxwell was charged afterwards, but from after Jeffrey Epstein. But I think it's more likely that a deal's been cut. I mean, some of these allegations are crazy.
And the jury would know about that? She'll be asked about that, right?
About whether she cut a deal with prosecutors? Oh, yeah. That's always used by defense lawyers to undermine the credibility of a witness, saying, oh, you're here under immunity agreement, right? You know, you cut a deal with prosecutors, right? You're facing decades in prison, and that's why you're here lying on the stand. That's the kind of stuff they do. By the way, it doesn't mean she's lying. It just means that she's thinking about herself. That's human nature. Yeah. I just had to say, all these incidents, I mean, how can Diddy survive in the court of public opinion no matter what happens here? I mean, you have the Green Apple incident. Well, I mean, I actually just had to Google the Glasgow smile. I didn't even know what that was.
So that allegation, right, was from one of the civil suits. I mean, look, the court of public opinion, I don't think there's a way for him to recover. The actual criminal trial, it does become a question. Does it amount to sex trafficking? Does it amount to racketeering? I could play both sides here. I could do a whole analysis back and forth about whether or not at this point in the trial the prosecution's proven or not. I think they're convinced he might not be a great guy. He might have abused people, but does it amount to a criminal enterprise? And that's why I think Christina Courtroom may be an important witness. By the way, Cassie Ventura also testified about Christina Courtroom too. Listen to this exchange. When you mention trusted assistants, who were some of the trusted assistants? I mean, in the very beginning, it was David James. It just kind of changed over time. Christina Courtroom, eventually, Neil Dominic, he had a lot of different assistants. At what point in your relationship did you start communicating with Miss Courtroom? As soon as she started, I'm not positive the year. Was that in the beginning, the middle, or the end of your relationship with Sean? It was like the middle of the relationship. What did you call Miss Courtroom? I called her KK. And how frequently did you interact with KK? Every day. And what subject matters did you communicate with KK about? Everything from scheduling to what kind of mood he was in. I talked to KK about a lot. She knew a lot of my personal things. Aside from conversations you had with your attorney, which I don't want you to ask about, was there any other way you went about trying to contact Sean regarding the book chapters? By the way, I'm taking different pieces of the testimony, but this is, I believe, was about Ventura allegedly offering Combs the rights to her book about her experiences, about her time with him, possibly that he would buy them for $30 million. Well, anyway, Ventura responded, yeah, I reached directly out to Christina, to KK. What did you ask KK? I asked if he had read it and or just knew about it at all. And she said that basically it hadn't been taken seriously. Like, I don't think anybody believed that that was actually me. So what do you mean you don't think anyone believed that was you? She said it wasn't taken seriously. Like, they didn't think that I would do something like that. Then, by the way, she testified about an episode where Combs had allegedly tried to get into her apartment. So listen to this exchange. Ms. Ventura, how do you know Sean was trying to get into the apartment? Because I was notified by his assistant. Who told you Sean was trying to get into your apartment? Well, Kerry, because she was there, and Christina Courtroom. What, if anything, could you hear while this was happening? Just chaos outside the door, banging, kicking, yelling. So Dave, according to Ventura, Courtroom was essentially in the thick of it all. And it does make you wonder, exactly, does she corroborate Cassandra Ventura's account, and how much is she going to be grilled about this? Again, I think a central role she might play.
Yeah, the big defense for Diddy and all this is consent. He's trying to make jurors believe that Cassie and the others consented to this activity. And if you can prove or at least show some doubt that there was consent here for that alleged human trafficking, then the whole case falls apart. So how do you combat that if you're Cassie? Well, you have corroboration. You have other witnesses who have testified, but also you have contemporary statements that she made to KK. Statements that said, here, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. And that kind of stuff's important because it shows that Cassie was being forced into it or was being coerced into it. And any statement she makes at the time can come in to show her present sense impressions, that she was thinking like this at the time. This was her spontaneous comments, and it shows that she was under duress, that it was not consensual. So KK is valuable for a lot of reasons. And that's why I guess maybe I'm a little surprised she has not been called yet by
Let's talk about that.
But that could happen. Yeah.
I think it was strategic. because other people have already testified about her too, right? And I think it's strategic on the part of prosecutors to not call her yet. Why do I say that? Deontay Nash, this was Combs and Cassie's stylist, took the stand. Question: who on Mr. Combs' staff did you talk to about the violence you observed Mr. Combs inflict on Cassie? Derek and Christina. Who is Christina? Puff's assistant. How did Christina respond when you told her about violence you observed between Mr. Combs and Cassie? That she would talk to him. Then there was an objection. The court overruled it. And did the violence stop after she said that? No. You said he would blow everyone's phone up. Who's the he? Puff. And when you say blow everyone's phone up, what did you mean? He would call incessantly. Who did you see him call incessantly? Me and Cassie. And who else during those same periods called you and Cassie? Christina. Christina Courtroom? Yes. Did you answer any of those calls? Yes. When you answered Mr. Combs' calls, what did he say? He would just say, we needed to get back to the house. She needs to get back to the house. And what do you remember his tone being? Sometimes angry. Sometimes he would soften up. And what do you remember Christina saying when you answered her calls? That she was going to help with the situation, that he's calmed down, that we should come back to the house. Then there was Ventura's former friend, Kerry Morgan, who testified about Christina Courtroom. Question: why would Miss Courtroom tell you she was trying to call you if he couldn't get in touch with Cassie, usually? Did she ever tell you who had told her to call? Well, I'm assuming it would be Sean. Without assuming, did she ever say that he had told her to call? Yes. And she testified about this alleged encounter when Combs allegedly showed up to Ventura's home, pounding on the door with a hammer. This, by the way, was after the infamous 2016 hotel video of Combs appearing to beat up Cassandra Ventura. Morgan testified police were called after Combs couldn't get into the apartment. Quote, who, if anyone, did you tell about the police officers arriving at the apartment? Christina Courtroom. Miss Morgan, do you recognize the participants in this chat? Yes. Who are they? Me and Christina. Could you please read your first two messages? I'm so sorry I missed your calls. I'm just so not used to this S. Are you okay? And then the first two messages on the next page. It's so dramatic. I haven't been looking at my phone. We're okay, but it's just so nuts. Okay, turning to this next message, can you read it, please? I don't think anyone should call her. Who is the her you're referring to? Cassie. Did you send an attachment with this message? Yes. What was that attachment? It's the card that the detective left. I'll read Miss Courtroom's messages if you read your own, please. Can I call you in a bit when I'm alone? She was looking for anyone to say the wrong thing so she can call domestic abuse. Who is the she that you're referring to in this statement? The police officer that came? Okay, turning to the next messages, could you please read? Of course. Cass just asked me to send you that. And what were you referring to when you said Cass just asked me to send you that? The business card of the detective. In these messages, Miss Courtroom mentioned she is going to call you. Did you talk with Miss Courtroom on the phone after this? I'm not sure. Mia, Combs' former assistant, Mia took the stand, testified that Combs physically and sexually assaulted her. And she, too, testified about how Christina Courtroom was in the thick of it, the knowledge component, alleged cooperation or facilitating this. So Courtroom would contact her, allegedly, when Combs wanted to get a hold of her. Again, alleged victim number 4. But it's interesting. For example, Courtroom allegedly messaged her, he just called me again, and he said he needs you to call him now. I told him everything you said, and he does not want to listen, and said you need to call him now. Mia, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to do. Mia, he just told me to tell you if you don't call him in the next 2 minutes, you don't have a job. Dave, is Courtroom a reluctant co-conspirator for racketeering conspiracy? And by the way, strategic, I think it was strategic to bring her up so much for the jury that when she finally does maybe testify, the jury is very familiar with who Christina Courtroom is. So 2 points there. Do you think she's a reluctant co-conspirator? Because again, racketeering conspiracy, he can't be it himself. And was there this ambivalence? And again, I think the strategic point of it was the jury's going to recognize her when if and when she testifies.
Yeah. Well, at times she does appear to be a reluctant co-conspirator, like that last email you read. But at other times, she seems to eagerly try to cover up for him and really enable him. So, yeah, it just depends. You could get her both ways. You can get her as someone who was full-fledged in on the racketeering, and other times that she was had a conscience and she was reluctant to go along, but she ultimately did. Either way, you got her as part of the conspiracy, the racketeering. You know, you could have done it either way. You could have brought her in after all the other people testified because they all corroborate each other. So if she goes up and lies, she'll look really bad, and it could blow back on the defense to say, oh, here's This is the employee covering up, and then you could always charge her for perjury. But I do think there is value, as I've been saying, about calling her as a rebuttal witness. It's like the sword of Damocles hanging over Diddy's head. You want to play? You want to put on some lies on your defense? I got the ace in the hole. I got that sword of the Damocles. I've got KK who will come and just corroborate everything Cassie said and undermine everything you said in your case. So you better be careful what you say in your defense.
Before we wrap things up, I have to talk to you about what I think the defense might do with her, right? And whether or not she'll be called by the defense. Seems unlikely. Seems like she'd be called by the prosecution. But if you go back to the cross-examination of these witnesses by Combs' defense attorneys and how these people were questioned specifically by Combs' attorneys about Christina Courtroom, I wonder if it gives us kind of a preview of how they might use Christina Courtroom for their benefit if she testifies. For example, George Kaplan, this was cross-examination, explaining who Christina Courtroom was. She was my immediate boss. Certainly in the first 6 months that I was there, she told me what to do and when to do it. I learned how to do the job very much from her guidance. I talked to her more than I talked to any other individual on the staff. We certainly bonded over the amount of time that we spent together, which was many hours in different locations and late nights and things like that. You said that at some point you spoke to Christina about the violence that you saw, correct? Correct. And if I remember your answer right, I think you said that Christina was disappointed and saddened, correct? And that's what she expressed to you in the conversation you had with her, right? Correct. And she was disappointed in Mr. Combs, is that right? Yes. As were you? Yes. You and Christina had a conversation when you said, this is what I saw. You told her what you saw, and you were disappointed, and even more than disappointed. I was sad. You were sad. And part of the reason you were sad, and tell me if it's right, I'm sorry for doing this way, because it's sad, right? Yeah, it's horrible. Then there was this cross of Kerry Morgan. KK was Sean Combs' chief of staff or personal assistant. She was with him all the time. She took care of she was like his right hand, basically. She's a good, really nice girl. Question to Morgan was, did you have your own relationship with KK? I did. And tell us about that. About a relationship? Yeah. It wasn't, we would only see each other when she was working or when I was hanging out with them, but we would hang out at Burning Man and stuff. She was there, we would hang out, we weren't that close, but understood. You said a minute ago that she's a nice girl. Just tell us more. She's a nice girl. She always seemed very innocent, and she's always trying to help everybody. She was always nice. I think that's deliberate here, Dave, right? I think it goes to the idea of this was all domestic violence. She didn't approve of it. She had no choice but to, do what Sean Combs wanted, but it wasn't necessarily a crime. She's a good person. Is that what you're getting from this cross?
Yes, and it is interesting in this case how both sides are working off largely the same facts. There's not too much of a dispute over the facts. It's just how to interpret them. On the defense, they're saying, yeah, Diddy was a bad guy. He was jealous. He is a domestic abuser, and so he should perhaps be charged in state court. But this is a federal trial, not on domestic abuse, but on racketeering, on human trafficking, on prostitution. Those charges don't apply. And here's the evidence, as we're going to interpret it, that proves this. This is a case of a jealous guy who had issues and committed some bad acts, but it wasn't human trafficking. It wasn't racketeering. That's a defense. On the other hand, the prosecution can paint this larger picture of a guy who's out of control, who ran this whole enterprise to do his bidding. And that included KK. That included force, fraud, and coercion for human trafficking. That included prostitution. And yes, it included racketeering through at least 2 predicate acts. We saw the Kid Cudi arson. We've seen the witness intimidation. We've seen the extortion, all these acts. So pick your poison, guilty.
I think the defense is basically saying there was no criminal agreement. She didn't agree to further any of this illegal activity. She didn't further sex trafficking operation, right? This idea was she didn't approve of any of this. She didn't condone any of this. I think that's what they're going with. So it'll be very interesting to see if Christina Courtroom takes the stand. She's already been mentioned so many times. Dave Arenberg, thank you so much for taking the time, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.
Before we begin, please be advised that viewer discretion is strongly recommended. None of the content presented here has been exaggerated or taken out of context. These are the exact statements made by the prosecution team, defense team, and Mia on June 2nd, 2025. Some words have been censored to comply with YouTube's guidelines. What you're about to hear is a voiced-over reading of Mia's testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Source: Courtroom reporter at Inner City Press on X.com. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Listen at your own discretion. Show DX1750. Did you work as an assistant to someone?
Maybe 2008 or 2007. I'm not sure.
You had a resume saying you had the ability to multitask and had thick skin.
I'm not sure I wrote that.
That you were able to deal with uncomfortable situations 24/7. At this moment, the prosecution objected, but was overruled. Did you use this as your CV?
Looks like it.
1753-R for admission. You went to James Madison University. It's a well-known institution.
Sure.
Then you were a design assistant.
Yes.
In 2008 to 9, you say you provided round-the-clock support. All personal and professional needs, keeping passports. They were all collected.
I don't exactly remember. I didn't travel.
But you traveled with Mr. Combs's companies?
Oh, yes.
So when you said they had your passport, they had everyone's passport. True?
Yes.
You are a strong person.
I'm good at teaching people, not necessarily at enforcing things.
You're a leader.
I don't know about that.
You speak up for yourself.
No.
But you empower other people. True.
Yes.
Let's look at your text messages in 1730 at CQ.
I sound like me.
Show the jury 1733. You left Mr. Combs's employ by March 2017.
Yes.
What did you write to Mr. Combs for Christmas 2018? Please read it.
Merry Christmas, I love you, and the New Year's. I had just seen him at Kim's funeral.
You reached out to him.
Absolutely.
This 2019 message.
I wrote, I had a nightmare I was being chased by R. Kelly, and you saved me.
The person you say raped you, saved you. At this moment, the prosecution objected, and the judge said to rephrase. Here, what did you write?
Sending you all the love in the world.
You were not in his grip anymore.
It's psychological.
Why do you keep referring to psychology? Why did you do this? Kim Porter's tragic death was 5 months before. Why were you reaching out to Mr. Combs?
5 months is not a lot.
What didn't you understand that Mr. Combs was brutal to you? How did you write this? At this moment, the prosecution objected on the grounds of argumentative, and then they had a sidebar, then continued. Now May 14th, 2020, and you texted to Mr. Combs. What?
My heart is broken about Dre. In my spirituality, I know that when people are done with the physical world, it's that they have completed their mission. I love you.
What's this about?
He auditioned for the James Brown part that Chad Boseman got. I told Puff I'd email him videos of his audition.
You carried about a video camera.
He required me to do it. Pre-iPhone, I was required.
Do you have any footage of Mr. Combs berating you? At this moment, the prosecution objected, but was overruled.
I would not have been allowed to record that.
Do you have anything about Mr. Combs berating you?
It would have violated confidentiality.
You have no text messages.
They showed me one on direct.
Showing what?
Puff saying, "F it, let's go to war."
Nothing else?
Only reaching out to other people in the office, things others had seen.
What did you write here?
I wrote, we had so many funny memories. OMG.
Anything in your phone about being brutalized by Mr. Combs?
I don't think so.
How would we find out? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. Mia, didn't you have time away from Mr. Combs to write? Today he sexually assaulted me?
I did not have time and would not have written that.
August 29th, 2020, he wrote to you. Glad you're well, love. Please send me the footage. For the doc. Mr. Combs let you go from your employment?
I don't know why. It was confusing. I was called back.
Here he says, he'll only remember the good times.
Yes.
It's 2020. The Me Too movement is strong for 2 years. You could say, I remember the bad times, right?
I would never have said that.
Because it's not true. At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was overruled. You wrote what?
Love you too. I wrote so many crazy things, like Mick Jagger trying to take me home, and that Baccarat game, my pink bedazzled iPhone. There were trillions of stories. Of course, I'll send to you. I was bamboozled by Heather. Remember the scrapbook I made you? I've got you.
Why didn't you write, you bamboozled me?
Because I was brainwashed.
By whom?
Puff.
How did he bamboozle you with a part of his body in you without your consent? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. What does brainwashing mean?
The highs were really high and the lows were really low. I was punished whenever Puff was violent, making me believe I had done something wrong. He was praised by the public.
You were aware of the Me Too movement. No outcry out of you. Why?
He said he was going to tell Cassie what happened. I internalized blame and shame.
Who threatened to tell Ms. Ventura about Mr. Combs supposedly assaulting you?
Puff.
Why didn't you respond? Great. Let's tell everyone what you did to me. At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. You said you have a moral obligation to speak up?
Now I do.
Why not in 2017?
I was brainwashed.
When did you first say, me too?
When I first saw him being held responsible. Now I have therapy.
Mr. Combs wrote, I gotta find that. You got a copy. What does it refer to?
I think he means the James Brown video.
Scrapbook.
I wrote, I think I have PDFs. I think I gave it to you for a B-day in your house on Mapleton. I customized that purple leather suit so you could walk not giving an F. If y'all can't find it, I will. But I didn't.
You had a PDF?
I thought so.
What did you write here?
My grandmom went into hospice, so I have to fly out. I have to miss your event here in my hometown. C'est la vie. Crush it and make history. Heart emoji.
Deepest sympathy for your grandmother.
Thanks.
What was this about?
There had been some terrible event with the police. Farrell organized an event to change the narrative of Beach Week, which I think is a college thing.
You wanted to see Mr. Combs.
I did not. I only said so. My hometown of Virginia Beach doesn't usually get this type of attention.
You're telling the jury you were scared of Mr. Combs, true?
True. I was scared of him when he was scary.
Listen to 1750. Tell me if you recognize it. Move to admit 1750 and 1750R. You and Ms. Ventura were best friends. Fair? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and they had a sidebar. One of the videos that was admitted was this video, which we will play for you now.
Shameless plug. Gotta put my lip gloss on. Poppin'! Puff Daddy, the living legend himself. You have not only revolutionized the game, but the entire world. I'm so blessed to call you my friend. Thank you for truly being one of the biggest inspirations in my life. To another 44 years of brilliance. Let's cheat up. I love you. Happy birthday. Revolt.
And they had a whole argument about evidence, but then continued. You and Ms. Ventura were best friends. Fair?
Yes.
You said she was your sister?
Yes.
You loved her?
Absolutely.
And you feel the same way today?
Yes.
You would never lie to her?
Puff didn't allow me to tell her things, like where he was, anything he said.
Was Ms. Ventura in love with Mr. Combs?
I thought so.
Did you ever tell her the person she loved raped you?
No.
Do you remember telling her Mr. Combs's brain need to be rewired? At this moment, the prosecution asked for a sidebar, then continued. Why would you cover up for Mr. Combs to Ms. Ventura? Why writing that Mr. Combs is just misunderstood? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and the judge said to rephrase. Did you tell Ms. Ventura she needs to stay with Mr. Combs?
I don't remember that. He could find out what I was telling her.
How?
He had stolen my phone and Cassie's phone many times. He's put tracking devices on her car.
But you were alone with Ms. Ventura.
Yes.
You sued Mr. Combs for $10 million?
It was a mediation. My lawyers ended up getting $200,000.
You got $200,000?
Yes.
Please look at the screen. Is that your social media account?
Looks like a text message. Sounds like me.
Your text to Mr. Combs?
I don't remember sending this.
You are in a tutu and Mr. Combs appears to be holding his private parts. In Ms. Ventura's lawsuit, she alleged sexual abuse.
Yes.
Why did you still communicate with Mr. Combs? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. Did you meet these prosecutors in January 2024?
I may have. I don't remember the timing.
Did you tell them Mr. Combs sexually assaulted you?
I don't remember when I told them.
Did you get a lawyer?
Yes.
The lawyer, who had 45 days earlier, obtained an enormous judgment. At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. Why did you hire her? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. You only first alleged assault in June 2024.
I don't remember the timing of things. The rest I can't go into. I understand it's privileged.
At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. Then the judge asked for a sidebar. Let's talk about Prince's party. You said you had no permission to go there, but you knew many people who knew Mr. Combs would be there. At this moment, the judge asked the defense to rephrase. Did you wear a disguise?
No.
Any photo of a chase?
No.
You say you and Ms. Ventura got on a paddleboard into a storm.
Yes.
Any recording of that?
No.
Any note or text message to prove it happened?
I don't think so. We were on a paddleboard.
Did you make it up?
No.
You said you had no time with family. Did you ever go to events with your family and friends?
Sporadically, over 8 years, but few and far between.
Weddings?
Sister and best friends, I believe.
Halloween?
I don't remember.
You had times with others, right?
I had to be in communication 24/7. I was never outside his grip.
Outside of the work environment, why couldn't you explain the abuse you say you were experiencing?
It's more complicated than that.
Isn't it true that other than the few times Mr. Combs was with Ms. Ventura, which is never okay, you were comfortable with Mr. Combs? At this moment, the judge asked the defense to rephrase. You never advised Ms. Ventura to leave him.
No.
Until 2024, you never told anyone you were sexually abused.
Unless it was to my privileged therapist, that's true.
Could you waive that privilege? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. You joined the Me Too money grab against Mr. Combs. At this moment, the prosecution objected. You knew Ms. Ventura received money from her lawsuit against Mr. Combs.
It was public.
But you speak with Ms. Ventura?
Never about anything I discussed with the government.
How would we know that? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and it was sustained. Let me show you documents. Read it to yourself. And Your Honor, could we have a sidebar? They had a sidebar, then continued. Mia, were you able to review over the bread some of your interviews with prosecutors?
Yes.
And you didn't mention abuse until June 2024.
I don't remember the dates.
Did you give all your materials to the government?
I gave them to my lawyer. They gave them to the government.
Look at this one. In these notes, did you raise sexual abuse to the prosecutors? At this moment, the prosecution objected, but was overruled. Did you raise it in January 2024?
Definitely not in the first meeting. I don't remember each specific meeting, but I definitely didn't raise it in the first meeting.
And in this next document that you just reviewed?
No, not to the specifics.
You never mentioned sexual abuse until you hired lawyer Sean Crowley.
I have no idea when I first mentioned it, except that it was after I had representation.
You intend to sue Mr. Combs for compensation. You want money.
No.
Who have you worked for since?
Madonna.
For how long?
8 months, from April 2019.
When you did that, did Mr. Combs assist you in getting that job?
Absolutely not.
So you were not blacklisted?
No.
No retribution?
He took away the TV show, the credit I was promised.
You told the jury you were surprised you were let go, right?
I did.
You were let go for drinking.
No.
You remember Ms. Ventura's video called Official Girl?
Yes.
And King of Hearts, and her song with Nicki Minaj, The Boys.
Yes.
And Nicki Minaj is well known.
Yes.
And Ms. Ventura did the song Numb with Rick Ross.
She did.
And I Love It with Fabulous.
Yes.
And do you remember Ms. Ventura being in Studio Kid Cutie?
I don't remember the specifics.
And Mr. Combs himself?
Yes.
The TV show you mentioned, what was it to be about?
My experience.
How a person from a small town dealt with a person such as Mr. Combs.
A comedic version.
What other films do you work on?
Dope, Lawless, Undefeated.
You enjoyed the projects.
Yes.
And you called the people a second family.
We all called it that.
You thought Mr. Combs was a genius.
At the time.
You wanted to continue to work with Mr. Combs, right?
I wanted to continue following my dream.
Do you, if Mr. Combs' company put more money into promoting Ms. Ventura than any other of its artists?
I didn't absorb everything.
Who is Jason Wiley?
He worked for the record label.
In budgeting, right? Do you recall being given the opportunity to have your therapist notes be seen by the parties? At this moment, the prosecution objected, and there was a sidebar. Then they continued. You never called law enforcement, right?
I did not.
You said when you were stopped while speeding in L.A., Mr. Combs got you out of it. You remember?
I do.
Did you ever think of calling anonymously?
No.
When you say Mr. Combs hurt your arm, did you seek medical help?
No, I would not have been allowed.
Did you take photos?
No.
Did you scream?
No, I was in shock.
Before the 5 days you say you were awake, did you ever stay awake that long?
Absolutely not.
You testified you would give up all of the money if there had not been sexual abuse. Any discussion that you will make money by testifying?
No, that's not even a thing.
Your Honor, can I set up those other matters? At this moment, the judge said yes and then said, "We'll reconvene." Then they continued. Nothing further?
Mia, was posting to social media part of your job?
Yes.
As part of that, did you post on your personal Instagram account?
Yes.
What did Mr. Combs do if he thought you were not doing your job?
I'd be yelled at and humiliated.
Did other employees also post for Mr. Combs' birthday?
Yes.
The birthday video, was it for Club Diddy?
Yes.
Did Mr. Combs co-own the water you were drinking? And did you say Revolt, the project you worked on, at the end?
Yes.
You posted about the good not bad times?
Yes.
Why did you want to make the person who abused you happy?
When he was happy, I was safe.
Were you worried about your physical safety?
Yes. I'd been abused by Puff before. I knew his wrath.
Did you engage a pro bono lawyer?
Yes.
Why did you meet with the government so much?
So my story could be understood.
Why were you terrified?
Of Puff and the repercussions.
Did the government tell you what to say?
No, only to tell the truth.
How do you feel about public speaking?
Terrified.
Can you explain that, given that you've been in comedy?
I had Puff's permission for that.
Any comparison to testifying about Mr. Combs assaulting you here?
None.
Why are you here today?
If not, I couldn't look my goddaughters in the eye and ever advise them what to do in this situation.
At this moment, the judge asked if there was a recross examination, and the defense said no. So that was the end of Mia's testimony, which in that video we showed you is who she was, known as Sarah, we believe.
The government calls Sylvia Oken. Where do you work?
The Beverly Hills Hotel for 17 years. I'm the director of sales and marketing.
How do reservations work?
A system called Opera.
Does Opera link a customer's alias to their real name?
Yes.
And this one, Who is it, really?
Sean Combs.
Can a guest change his or her alias?
Yes.
How is this paid for?
It's to Tia Fletcher at Bad Boy, paid by Amex of Sean Combs.
What's this?
The folio or bill for room 259.
What's his?
A $500 charge for oil damage.
No further questions.
The accompanying guest was Cassie Ventura.
Yes.
Nothing more. And that was it for the day in the Diddy trial. What did you think about the finale of Mia's testimony? Who do you think did better, the prosecution or defense? Let us know in the comments down below, and I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So we have with us law and crimes reporter Elizabeth Milner, who has been inside that courtroom for every day of testimony and things that are not even testimony related, including an outburst today and apparently someone getting banned from court. Elizabeth, it's good to see you. Let's start with what happened here. So you're in court. What did somebody say? And also, I understand somebody else is now banned from being in that courtroom. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, so Jesse, this happened first thing this morning. It was outside of the presence of the jury. We were actually talking, or not we, as far as the press is going, but the arguments were about Mia's testimony and possibly introducing some jail calls. So I was listening, taking notes, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing screaming going on. And it's from a woman who we've been kind of noticing has been causing a couple of troubles here and there, just as far as court goes. She was removed from the overflow room during jury selection, and she was removed from the main courtroom today during these arguments. And so I'm writing down my notes, I'm jotting everything down, but even just the backstory of this particular woman, we in the press have been referring to her as the MTA lady. It's not necessarily confirmed whether or not she actually works for MTA, but she always kind of comes in with an MTA jacket, and that's how we kind of have remembered her. So I'm just going to give you guys the low that we had kind of had bets with amongst us in the press just about how long it would take before something like this were to happen again, because we were thinking that she would cause trouble just right off the bat. And then lo and behold, it didn't take very long for her to kind of stir up some trouble and for the marshals to escort her out. So from what I heard, it was just cussing, it was yelling, mainly from her. And then I saw just 4 marshals just try to grab her. She was saying things along the lines of, oh, use your gun against me, that type of thing. And she was threatened, I believe, with the taser, but that didn't happen. We didn't see any of that. And so from our understanding is after this incident, after kind of the marshals escorted her outside of the courtroom, as far as what was going on inside for the judge, he went back to business as usual. But from my understanding, she was just kind of dismissed from the courthouse altogether, and likely won't be able to come back in, and likely won't be able to come back in the courtroom too. But even as far as just the incident of somebody revealing Mia's true identity and I guess saying this over a live stream or in a video, that type of thing, that was also brought up shortly after the incident of the woman having the outburst inside the courtroom today. And so what we did learn about that, it was somebody who was actually sitting on our side of the press, not with a NYC verified press credential, nothing like that. But what it's been kind of alleged is that it was somebody sitting on our side who kind of works for a blog or a media outlet, that type of thing, and that after court yesterday was doing this video, doing this live stream, and was essentially talking about Mia and wasn't referring to Mia as her pseudonym, was instead referring to Mia as her true identity. And so what AUSA Emily Johnson discussed with the judge today is that she didn't see this individual inside the courtroom today, so there was no further, I guess, talk about what was to happen next. But if this person were to show up once again, then they'll definitely not be allowed back into the courtroom. And I doubt even into the overflow room at this point either.
Well, Elizabeth, that is quite a way to start the day. And let me tell you something. We just got a super chat comment from Donnie ZTV. Great reporting, Elizabeth Milner. So there you go. So you got a bunch of fans online. But talking about that, talk to me real quick, because I know you have to head back into court in a little bit. Eddie Garcia takes the stand. Now, you and I talked about him yesterday, because yesterday he was intending to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. You know, ears perk up. What's he going to say? What did he do wrong? And he was granted immunity to testify. So this former security guard from the Intercontinental Hotel, what were the highlights of his testimony?
Well, I thought Eddie Garcia had a lot of highlighted moments during his testimony. So yes, we did see him invoke his Fifth Amendment right as far as self-incrimination goes, just yesterday. And then we saw him actually take the stand today. And so he was questioned by AUSA Mitzi Steiner. And so the basis or the kind of the meat of his testimony had to kind of be surrounded by what had happened on March 5th of 2016. Anyone who has been following this case knows that that was the exact day of the Intercontinental Hotel incident. And so what we learned from Eddie Garcia is that he is now 33 years old. However, at the time that this incident occurred, he was just 24 years old. He was working for Securitas, who we kind of know a little bit about from Officer Israel Flores' testimony, who was one of the first witnesses called by the government to testify essentially against Sean Combs, aka Diddy. So we were learning just about who the director of security was, and that was a man named Bill Medrano. The assistant director of security was Officer Israel Flores. And so Eddie Garcia was talking about how he's still friends with Israel Flores, saw him a couple weeks ago, but they didn't talk about the substance of their testimony. But Garcia said he saw a TikTok about his testimony, so I thought that part was interesting. So we see an exhibit photo of the employee sign-in sheet, where you see on the day of this incident that we see Eddie had worked from 2 p.m. till 1:30 in the morning. And so we saw some extra overtime because he normally gets off at 10 p.m. But instead on that day, he got off at 1:30 in the morning. And so he was saying after this incident occurred that we know from Officer Israel Flores' testimony that Diddy was kind of trying to buy his way out of this, trying to say like, hey, I got some money, can you make this go away? But then from Eddie Garcia's perspective, he said he got a phone call from somebody, and it wasn't necessarily Diddy at first, but we heard from him today that Christina Courtroom had called him, and he said he was even kind of nervous and a little apprehensive about how Christina Courtroom got not only his work number, but his personal cell phone number too. And so then there was kind of a sidebar, and the sidebar was pretty lengthy because right before the sidebar had happened, Christina Courtroom said something along the lines to Eddie Garcia that Diddy was intoxicated that night and didn't remember what was going on. But they were pretty much trying to obtain the one and only version of that security tape. They wanted to buy it off of the hotel, and initially they were going to purchase it for about $50,000. However, Diddy gave them double that of money. He gave them $100,000, and that money was divvied up pretty much. It was divvied up $50,000 to the director, or it was divvied up $50,000 to Bill, who was the director of security. Henry Elias, who also works at the hotel, was given $20,000. Eddie Garcia kept $30,000 to himself and actually used the money to buy a used car. Then we kind of slowly got into what Eddie had to do in return for this money, and that was to sign an NDA. We saw kind of a copy of this NDA inside the courtroom, where it was pretty much saying that you're not to discuss this. You're signing away that you are giving away the one and only copy. And as far as Eddie Garcia is concerned, he said the next time he saw that this video, because he thought that he had turned over the one and only copy through a thumb drive to Diddy, he thought that was done. He thought that this incident was over. He was going about his business until he saw the video once again playing on CNN. And it's a video that a lot of us have seen at this point, and possibly even some jurors too.
Yeah, I find that fascinating because legitimately, this goes, as we've been talking about, to the bribery allegation, one of the underlying crimes of racketeering. And clearly, the issue of him, not being essentially bought off and not being cooperative with law enforcement and not reporting it, you could see why he needs some sort of protection. Real quick, I know you have to jump back, but in 1 minute, 2 minutes, what was the cross-examination about?
Yeah, the cross-examination went pretty quick. So we saw an exhibit photo of the NDA again, but exclusions from the NDA, where it said a disclosure of confidential information in response to valid order by a court or other government body, or B, as otherwise required by law, will not be breach of this agreement or a waiver of confidentiality for other purposes. Then we saw the non-disparagement portion of that NDA, and that was a non-disparagement against Combs or Combs parties. And then the final question from Brian Steele, who did the cross-examination, was whether or not Eddie Garcia went to law enforcement with this information. And then, spoiler alert for the redirects, he was kind of asked that same question, and he said he did report it to law enforcement. It just wasn't police, it wasn't LAPD. Instead, it was federal agents when he had first talked about this incident and everything that came afterwards too.
All right, very interesting stuff. Elizabeth Milner, as always, great reporting. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I know you got to get a good seat. Who knows what's going to happen next in that courtroom? Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks,
All right.
Jesse.
So let me get now to this. We have a question from Legs7K for all three of my guests. Afi, I'll start with you. But it says, hey, Jesse, how does Rich, Afi, and Candace see the next 3 weeks going with this trial, or what would they like to see come into play next? Afi, I start with you. I don't know if we can hear you, Afi. I don't know if you're muted or we got to work. Afi. Okay, I'll tell you what. As we work on Afi, let me go to Candace. Candace, I'll start with you.
So what I want to see is receipts. I want to see digital trails, which is what we are getting to, right? With the money, who oversaw the transactions, so that we could see the connection of all of this happening. Because a lot of this happened with cash transactions. So I want to see that. I also need to look at this whole RICO conspiracy. Who are the other people? I want to hear from security guards. I have to hear from those people who are protecting Combs, because Combs wasn't driving himself around. Combs wasn't, going out and getting candles. He was getting other people to get this. All of those people who we haven't heard from, who were protecting him, those are the people who are going to be key. And I think that we will definitely hear from them, and I think that we need to.
Rich?
Yeah, I sort of agree with that. I think we need to see the bona fides of the RICO claim here. I think we need to see what exactly the enterprise it is. There are conspiracy allegations here. We need to see somewhat of an agreement to commit criminal predicate acts and a pattern of racketeering activity. That's what RICO is. It's not abuse. It's not domestic violence. It is a pattern of racketeering activity. And I do think we need to, I totally agree with Candace. I think we need to follow the money. We need to connect it to the accounts, and we need to put the whole enterprise together so that we can make this RICO claim stick.
So I'm going to get Afi's answer to this later on. I know we're working on some technical issues with her, but Candace, I'll throw another question to you. I was just talking about Eddie Garcia's testimony. This is a question from RSS. Are there any penalties for Eddie initially lying to the police about the Intercontinental Hotel video?
Well, not now. And now that he has immunity, that's off the table. I mean, if he lies on the stand or was lying today, that's one thing, because if you perjure yourself, that's not protected. But he came in yesterday. He signed what he needed to do in order to be protected for today. And because it was a subpoena, he said he didn't want to be here, obviously, but he came full throttle, but he's safe so far.
Candace, let me throw another question to you. This is from Rel. Can you bribe someone who's not a law enforcement officer?
Well, sure. Sure, you can bribe someone that's not a law. You can really bribe anyone, especially if the goal is to suppress evidence, if the goal is to obstruct justice, if the goal is to hide something illegal that you were trying to do, and that's what the financial transaction was for, that in the name of the law would be illegal, certainly that bribery would stick like anybody else.
So again, we're taking your questions in right now. We're also waiting for court to start. We will give you real-time updates and a real-time breakdown for the next hour or so because we don't need to miss any moment of this trial. Rich, I'll go to you. We got a question from Fragility G4. If Diddy is acquitted, does double jeopardy apply only to federal charges, or can a state press similar charges?
So a state could press theoretically different charges. You don't usually see a state prosecuting RICO charges anyway, since that's a federal statute. But remember, there are issues because a lot of the things we're talking about are a long time ago and out of the statute of limitations. So I don't really know. I'd have to sort all through it to see if a state could still make some hay here if he's acquitted.
And the argument against the prosecution is because there are statute of limitations issues, they have taken these allegations, and again, this is the argument for the defense or people in Sean Combs' camp, they've manufactured it, they've transformed it into a complicated federal case. There are those, even though we're talking about it, who say, I still don't see racketeering, I still don't see sex trafficking, it feels like a reach, I don't think they've reached those elements, but this is why you can bring similar conduct that may have had an overlap with state charges, right? I mean, the 2016 attack Theoretically, he could have been charged at the state level for that, but it was too old. Obviously, now we know there's issues of where the video was. But at the same time, it could be an element. It could be evidence of racketeering or evidence of sex trafficking. So you see that overlap there. Okay, Candace, we've got a question from Christina Lester. Why is arson such a specific predicate of RICO? If he'd just taken a baseball bat or golf club to Kid Cudi's car, would it not qualify for RICO?
Well, listen, there are 35 predicate crimes that you need for RICO. It has to be on that list. This is what the law was determined to be in 1970, albeit for mafia. But it happens to be on that list, and that's why arson is specific. It is a very serious crime, right? It's not a misdemeanor on any level. So because it's so serious, and because it was involved with so many people in terms of when you look at it on a mafia level, it made the list. It just has to be one of these things on the list, and that's why it's important. It has to be on that list.
I've got a question here, Rich, from Lisa. This is a great question. KK, so Christina Courtroom. This is Sean Combs' former chief of staff, right? The head of the personal assistants, I would say. This is somebody who I actually dedicated another sidebar to yesterday about her role and how much she's been mentioned. KK has now been implicated at the hotel trying to get the tape and calling the security guard. Is she part of RICO and will have to get immunity? So will she testify?
I don't know if she'll testify. That's an interesting question. I don't know if they've offered her immunity to testify, or theoretically, if she hasn't been offered immunity, she might plead the fifth instead of testifying because she would be implicating herself. So I don't actually know what's going to happen, but she's very clearly part of what the prosecutors are painting to be a criminal enterprise. She's the chief of staff. She is, in theory, carrying out his bidding. She's the person who goes out to find this videotape so that he can retrieve it because they know there is very bad evidence out.
Has the prosecution in Sean Diddy Combs' trial just proven a clear-cut case of bribery, a major underlying alleged crime of racketeering? Well, not only did a former security guard at the hotel where Combs allegedly beat up Cassie Ventura testify that Combs paid $100,000 for that surveillance footage, but then we heard from Combs' former CFO, the money trail. Oh, and by the way, someone had an outburst in court and was kicked out. Quite the day, and Law and Crimes reporter Elizabeth Milner's on with us to break down everything that happened. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. If you received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, just takes a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on screen, click the link below, or head over to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. What a day in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial. You know, I got a lot of questions about how is the prosecution proving racketeering conspiracy on top of the sex trafficking and prostitution charges. But how are they proving racketeering, right? That Combs agreed to run this criminal enterprise that engaged in a pattern of illegal activity, that there are all these underlying predicate crimes. The prosecution has to prove at least two. So there's forced labor, kidnapping, arson, sex trafficking, drug offenses, bribery. Well, that one is very important and very particular to today. Why? Because we heard from a former security officer at the Intercontinental Hotel out in LA. So this is the site of where Combs purportedly beat up Cassandra Ventura, victim number one in this case, back in 2016, an event that was captured on footage. And by the way, remember prosecutors say that she was leaving a freak-off at that time, that this is evidence of sex trafficking, that Combs was using force to induce her into engage in these freak-offs. But we also heard from the former CFO of Combs Operations. Oh, and by the way, someone was banned from court and somebody else was kicked out of court for an outburst. So, for that and more, I want to bring on Elizabeth Milner, Law and Crimes reporter, who has been with us every day of this trial. Elizabeth, so good to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come back here on Sidebar. So let's start there. Someone was kicked out, apparently had an outburst, and somebody else has now been banned from the courtroom. And by the way, this was all in the morning, before any testimony even began. What happened?
Yeah, a lot happened this morning, bright and early this morning. And to your point, Jesse, it happened before the jury was brought in, before the witness took the stand this morning. And a lot of us just kind of in the media, we've been kind of knowing about this person who we were all expecting to make some type of outburst. We were just kind of waiting on when this would actually occur. And so that was kind of the topic of discussion. So it wasn't that surprising that we saw this woman who we've been referring to as the MTA lady. We don't necessarily know if she works for MTA, but she kind of always wears this MTA jacket when she comes to court, and she's someone who stands in line with us in the morning. And so we've seen her. She isn't like as abrasive as maybe we were led to believe until we saw what had happened this morning. And so what had ended up happening is there were some arguments outside the presence of the jury. They were discussing Mia's testimony, and then all of a sudden I hear just kind of some screaming or yelling coming from behind me, and it was the exact same woman we all thought it was going to be. And so initially when court started, we thought that's when something might have happened, when Diddy was brought in, because it seems from our point of view that she might have been someone very much on the team defense side, team Diddy side. So we were thinking, oh, something might happen as soon as he's brought in. But no, we were in the middle of arguments. We were listening to what both sides were saying just regarding Mia's testimony. And then I look up from my notepad as I'm writing these notes, and she's just facing the door, kind of looking like she's about to exit the courtroom. And then the marshals are coming kind of inward. And so it seemed like that there was going to be this big confrontation, but she's just yelling and screaming at the marshals pretty much. You heard curse words flying. You heard her pretty much say that, oh, you should pull out your gun or do this, do that, that type of thing. And then all of a sudden we saw the marshals kind of take her out of the courtroom. It took a couple of marshals to get her out of there, but she was yelling, she was screaming, she was saying things along the lines that this was the prosecution's fault. And so it was pretty disruptive this morning. And surprisingly, again, that this was something that had happened before. So not only was she kicked out of the courtroom today, but she was kicked out of the media overflow room during jury selection, from what I've heard. And so it seems like she's been disruptive, again, not once, but now twice. And it seems like as far as her wanting to get back inside this courtroom, she doesn't look like this will happen.
And Elizabeth, didn't she say they're all laughing at you to Diddy or something like that?
So I did hear that part whenever I was leaving the courthouse today. She was still kind of in this vicinity. She was still kind of doing, I guess, these interviews with these bloggers or vloggers, that type of thing. But yeah, she was kind of summing it up and saying that people were laughing at her.
Right.
I don't think that's necessarily the case as far as what had happened this morning, but it seemed like she felt like she was kind of the butt of everyone's joke.
Oh, see, I thought she was basically saying, she was saying to Diddy, they're all laughing at you out there, because again, she does seem like her comments from the reporting that she was pro Diddy. So interesting to say the least. By the way, before we get into the person who has been banned from the courtroom, we'll get to that. You mentioned the arguments. There were arguments that were happening right before the outburst. Didn't they have to do with what the prosecution wants to introduce into evidence now, which could be very, very interesting if that's the case?
Yeah, for sure. And it seemed like after Mia was done with her cross-examination, I felt like maybe, and these are just my words, I'm not necessarily sure this is how they felt, but it seemed like the government really kind of felt defeated in a sense. They were talking about her cross-examination, hers being Mia's cross-examination, and just how the defense was very abrasive with her, that Brian Steele was yelling at her and essentially yelling at a victim of sexual assault and sexual abuse. And so what the government was proposing is that they wanted to offer Diddy's jailhouse calls because they want to produce the excerpts as soon as this evening, and they feel like they're relevant, these jailhouse calls, because they corroborate Mia's testimony that she felt compelled to write those happy birthday messages throughout the years, saying happy birthday to Diddy even when she no longer was under his employment, even after that she had parted ways with Revolt Films and with Diddy's companies. And so they had brought this up, not even surprisingly, they had brought this up previously during the pretrial hearings, where they were saying that Diddy, even from behind bars, was coordinating these specific kind of social media campaigns, whether it was to get his children to say happy birthday, capture it on video, then post it to his Instagram, just those types of things. And they were kind of bringing that back, where again, they were making the argument that Mia felt compelled to do these happy birthday posts, and they want to bring on these jailhouse calls because they believe that Diddy uses his birthday to kind of shape the narratives, and they believe that these jailhouse calls are probative. And again, this was something that they've been talking about since the pretrial hearings, where it seems like, again, even from behind bars, Diddy's kind of still directing things and kind of trying to, I think, reclaim his public image, that people love him, that people wish him well, that people, even on his birthday, even when he's locked up, will still wish him happy birthday and again wish him well as he's going through this criminal trial now.
I always wondered if his alleged activity from behind bars, including allegedly contacting people through improper means, was going to make its way into this trial. So it's possible it might. But now let's talk about the person who is officially banned from the court. You talked about Mia, so alleged victim number 4 here, testified under a pseudonym. This was a former assistant of Combs, claims that she was physically abused by Combs, that she was forced to work these long, crazy hours, but also that she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs. So a very sensitive, important witness. Her identity remaining anonymous was important in this case. But my understanding is somebody was banned from court today who may have violated that, right?
Yeah, that is something that happened, I believe, yesterday. And the government did bring this to the judge this morning, where they were talking about how some of the attorneys were walking outside, kind of in the square area where a lot of us kind of go. We turn our phones back on after not having them all day. And somebody who was sitting, I believe, on the press side yesterday was live streaming during this, or making some type of video where, instead of referring to Mia as Mia, that is her pseudonym that was assigned by this court order, instead Mia was referred to by her real name. And so what ended up happening is the judge and pretty much the courthouse ruled that this person cannot go back into the courthouse, can't go back into the courtroom. And so we didn't see this person this morning, this individual that they were talking about, nor do I know this individual's name, but I know of this person. And so from what the government's perspective was, that they really just wanted the judge to kind of do something, knowing that we have another person who's testifying under a pseudonym as early as maybe tomorrow or even on Thursday, and that person obviously being Jane. And so from the government's perspective, it wasn't just that one instance of the person who was doing the live stream or doing the video saying Mia's real name. They also got another alert that somebody on Twitter or X also revealed Mia's true name after one of the exhibits by the defense was leaked or released. And so instead of redacting her photo or redacting her image, this Twitter post or X post just went up using Mia's real name. And so what the government did ask the judge is if they could find some type of way to order that this post be taken down. Not sure just the judge's kind of full extent as far as ordering this specific Twitter account. Not sure what this Twitter account's name is or anything like that, whether or not the judge can step in. But as far as Jane is concerned, they are making some different changes that are different from how Mia was testifying, where they're not going to be showing the exhibits to the public. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be seeing them on the screen whenever she does take the stand. However, the government did assure that the public would be getting the redacted exhibits of Jane's text messages, images that they are allowed to show that aren't sensitive in nature, but they just won't be coming whenever we see her testify later this week.
I'm not surprised by that. I've always been the point. I'm a member of the media. I don't think, even though there's an evidentiary value about what's going on those tapes and whether or not Sean Combs can be heard on those tapes, coercing her into certain acts, I think the risk of everyone else seeing it outweighs the benefit, even from a reporting point of view, but clearly important for the jury to see it. Okay, now we got to talk about Eddie Garcia. Okay, so Eddie Garcia came up yesterday first. So he wanted to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He was actually granted immunity to testify. This former security officer at the LA Intercontinental Hotel back in 2016. I'll tell you what, seems like it made sense that he wanted some sort of protection, because he admitted to quite a lot. He helped support the bribery allegation, one of the underlying crimes of racketeering that the prosecution is hoping to prove, right? Because what did he say about that day in March of 2016? What did he see, and who was he contacted by?
Yeah. Well, according to Eddie Garcia, when he was on the stand, it seemed like he was really kind of involved in a lot. So we meet Eddie on the stand yesterday, but then he took the stand again this morning. He was questioned by Mitzi Steiner. So what we know about him is that he's 33 years old and has been working in private security for about 13 years. However, in 2016, specifically on March 5th of 2016, which we all know now if we've been following this case, which we sure have, this was the day of the Intercontinental Hotel incident between Diddy and Cassie, where Cassie was allegedly leaving a freak off and then Diddy had attacked her, something that we all have seen at this point, the surveillance video. And so Eddie was talking about how on that day he was notified about an incident, the specific incident being a domestic dispute, and then he points out that this involves Sean Combs and Cassandra Ventura, points out Diddy in court, that type of thing. And so he said that he understood that under this immunity deal he had to be truthful in his testimony, but he was talking about how even during this incident he was just 24 years old and had only been working on the job just for a couple of months before this incident occurred. And so then he kind of discusses who his higher-ups are, or who his supervisors are, that being Bill Medrano, Director of Security, and Officer Israel Flores, the Assistant Director of Security. And one thing that Eddie Garcia said during his testimony that I thought was pretty interesting is that he's actually friends with Officer Israel Flores even to this day. He said he saw him a couple weeks ago. They didn't discuss his testimony, but he did say he saw a little bit of testimony on TikTok. And so that was kind of an interesting point. But then we get into the exhibits. And so what do we see from these exhibits? We see an employee sign-in register sheet, which kind of showed the hours that Eddie was working on the day of this incident. So he checked in around 2 p.m. and then he's supposed to leave his job at 10 p.m. every day during that time period. But however, on March 5th, kind of trickling into March 6th, he didn't get off until 1:30 in that morning, or 1:30 that following morning. And so he said he was shown surveillance video of this incident, and Eddie Garcia said that he could monitor the cameras at the security base, but he could see more than one camera at a time. But again, these cameras are motion censored, so he doesn't capture every single thing at every single moment, and plus there's a lot of cameras from his description of it. So then we see an exhibit, and this being the exhibit of the surveillance video from the incident. We can see Cassie in kind of that elevator bank or elevator lobby, if you call it that, and then we see kind of the point to where Cassie's kind of in her purse and trying to grab, I think, shoes or something out of her bag, and then you see Diddy come up, he hits her, he kicks her, she's on the ground. So it's something that we all have seen. It's nothing new to the jury, but Eddie Garcia was saying that at first during this incident, he didn't even recognize Diddy or Cassie, but he later learned it was the two that were involved in this, what was labeled as a domestic dispute. And so he said when he arrived at work, law enforcement wasn't contacted after this incident. And Eddie Garcia had said that it was because Cassie said that she didn't want police to be involved and that she didn't want medical attention. And so he had reviewed the incident report when he had arrived to work. And so then we see the incident report in an exhibit, and that again being from March 5th of 2016, where there were attachments to this report, including even video. And so Eddie explained that he got a call during his shift, about an hour or an hour and a half into his shift, but it was a call that didn't appear local, nor did he necessarily recognize this number, but it was an interesting person who had called him, and that person was none other than Christina Courtroom, who was Diddy's kind of right-hand gal. She was kind of, in a way, not just a fixer, but also his like executive assistant, and somebody who we, even at Law and Crime, know very well, it seems like, just from everything that has to do with Christina Courtroom. And so Christina had asked about this incident to Eddie and had even requested a copy of the video or just see the video so she could understand kind of what everything was going on with it. And so Eddie had said that Christina said that Diddy was intoxicated during this incident and that he didn't remember. And so there was an objection from the defense. That objection was sustained. There was a big sidebar, and then, not sidebar by Jesse Rubber, but there was a big sidebar, and then they kind of came back and started asking more questions. The prosecution was. And so Eddie had told Christina Courtroom that she needed to reach out to management. Then an hour or an hour and a half later, Christina shows up to the hotel, and she showed up to the hotel lobby asking about this video. And so Christina said that she was unaware of what happened on the video, but that she wanted to talk to hotel management. And Eddie Garcia kind of, I guess, tried to help navigate her into what she could do next, but kind of told her off the record, but on the record while he was testifying, that this incident was pretty bad. And so Christina called later again after leaving the hotel and passed the phone along to who else? None other than Diddy himself. And so Diddy had a chance to speak to Eddie Garcia, and Diddy said something along the lines of, "Do you know who I am?" And Eddie Garcia was like, you know, he recognized the voice. He knew it was Sean Combs, aka Diddy. And so Eddie was explaining that Diddy sounded nervous on this call and was talking super fast, kind of how I always talk, and that Diddy was saying that he had too much to drink, and said something along the lines of, "You know how women are. If this video gets out, this could ruin me." That was kind of the gist of the call. And so Eddie was explaining that Diddy was stuttering through this, but had requested the video, and Eddie had told him that he needs a subpoena to get this video. And so then Eddie Garcia sends an email to his higher-ups just about Diddy calling, requesting this video. And so we see an exhibit of Eddie mentioning this to his bosses. And so it says, "Mr. Combs, who is staying in room 602, requested to have a sit-down meeting with you in regards to the incident." And then I'm paraphrasing here. Mr. Combs mentioned that he has a lawyer who had notified him that there was a thumb drive and was really concerned. And so at the bottom of this email, then we see kind of a link or just a contact information for Christina Coram. And so Christina then contacted Eddie multiple times after this. Even when Eddie was at home, she somehow got his personal number, and Eddie was saying that he didn't even provide his number to Christina or even Diddy. And so he said he was nervous and scared about why he was getting calls to his personal line and how the two even obtained his personal number. But Christina said that she would introduce herself again and gave the phone to Diddy, and Diddy had told Eddie Garcia that Eddie sounded like a good guy and that the footage could ruin Diddy, and that he wanted Eddie to do something about this video. And so Eddie was explaining that he didn't have access to provide the video. He didn't have the credentials to get the video from the server, something that Officer Israel Flores had testified to, because he was one of the first witnesses called, that really the only people who could grab the video, obtain the video, was the director of security. And so that was Bill Medrano. And so Bill did have access to the server, and Diddy had offered to take care of Eddie Garcia and whatever he needed. And what did Eddie think that this taking care of meant? Well, he thought it meant financially. And so Eddie Garcia then went back to work. He reached out to Bill Medrano, who again is his supervisor, the director of security, and Bill said that he would do it. He would get the video for Diddy, but he would do it for a price, and that price was $50,000. And so Eddie had called Christina Coram back and Christina gave the phone to Diddy. And Diddy sounded super excited, according to Eddie, and referred to Eddie as Eddie, my angel. I knew you could help. I knew you could do it. And this is Diddy talking to Eddie at this point. And then Eddie had told Bill, after he got off the phone with Diddy, that everything was a go and that Diddy wanted this particular video ASAP. And so Bill Medrano showed up to work the next day. He went up to the server room. He pulled the video and just put it on a thumb drive, and then the thumb drive was then given to Eddie. And so then Eddie told Christina Coram and Diddy that he had the thumb drive of the video. Diddy responded that he was happy and excited about this, and Diddy gave Eddie an address to meet with him ASAP because he wanted this video now. And so what we see is kind of Eddie's timesheet from the day when he goes into work, leaves work, that type of thing. But on this particular day, when Eddie was turning over this video to Diddy, it's now March 7th, but it shows that Eddie had been working that day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. However, he being Eddie, said that while he was on the stand, that Bill said that if anyone were to ask where he was when he wasn't at the hotel, just to say that he was running errands. And in a way, he was kind of running errands. That errand was to meet Diddy to exchange this video in exchange for money. And so Eddie had explained that he had arrived to a high-rise building. He called Christina Coram's number. Then somebody from security came down. Eddie said he can't remember the name, so we don't know who this particular security guard was, but Eddie was saying that this security guard was telling Eddie that he did a good thing. And so when Eddie arrived, it was Diddy, Christina Coram, and then this unnamed bodyguard. And that Diddy seemed super happy and excited just about obtaining this video. Diddy asked Eddie if he had it being the drive, and Eddie just handed it over. So then Diddy left the room, but then when he returned, Diddy was asking whether or not this was the one and only copy. Are there other copies? Are there other duplicates out there? And that he didn't want this video to get out. He was even asked if there's anything stored on the cloud or any backups of this video. And so then Eddie just makes sure with Bill that this is the one and only copy, and Bill told Eddie it was the one and only copy. And so Eddie said that Diddy said it wasn't just him that was concerned about this video getting out, but that Cassie was concerned about this video getting out, and whether or not Cassie might possibly make a police report. This was Eddie's concern to Diddy, and Diddy told Eddie that Cassie knew about this and she wanted this video pulled too. So then Diddy FaceTimes Cassie. Cassie was wearing a hoodie, we presume, possibly to cover up her injuries, that type of thing. But it's not like we saw any exhibit photos of what she looked like after the fact, beyond what she had testified to when she was testifying. But Eddie had explained that Diddy directed Cassie to tell Eddie that she wanted this video gone too, and that Cassie herself said that she had a movie coming out and she wanted this video to go away. And so that was kind of the gist of what had happened before the video was turned over. There was a lot that even happened after the video was turned over.
And look, I think that point could be helpful for both the prosecution and the defense. Well, you know, for the prosecution point of view, you have Combs, again, directing Cassie to say this, right? Or the defense could say, hey, listen, this wasn't about a criminal trying to conceal evidence of a crime. He was trying to make sure evidence didn't come out, or make sure a video didn't come out that could embarrass him and Cassie. He was trying to protect both of them. So it'll be up to the jury which way to view that, although, you know, based on the timesheets, right, and based on his testimony and the email, you could say he's providing credible testimony. On top of the fact, what's his advantage to testify, right? He wanted to have a Fifth Amendment protection, gets immunity. Why? Because we didn't even get to the payment yet and what he didn't do, or allegedly didn't do, because he admitted something. So talk to us about what the payment was, what the instructions were regarding the payment, what he signed, and he didn't report it, right? So talk to us about those things.
Yeah, so even after Eddie Garcia turned over this thumb drive to Diddy, Diddy wanted more. He wanted Eddie Garcia, he wanted Bill Medrano, and he wanted the security officer, who we know to be Officer Israel Flores, to turn over their IDs to Diddy so that way he could take care of them. And again, by taking care of, Eddie interpreted that to mean financially. And so I thought it was interesting that he had wanted Officer Israel Flores's ID in particular, because if you remember, when Officer Flores was testifying, that he said that Diddy had tried to shove money in his face during the incident and how he didn't accept it. He kind of turned it away. And so even while Eddie was on the stand, he described Officer Flores as kind of a stand-up guy. He wouldn't go for this, he wouldn't do this, but Diddy ended up getting 3 IDs, one being Eddie Garcia's, the other being Bill Medrano's, but then the other third person was a man named Henry Elias, who was the other security guard who had been working at the hotel around this time. So then we see exhibit photos of all 3 men in their ID photos. And then Diddy asked Eddie Garcia to sign an NDA afterwards and promised that this thumb drive, this particular surveillance video that by now, again, a lot of us have seen, was the one and only copy that was made. So then we see an exhibit photo of the NDA, and it said something along the lines of, because got to paraphrase because it was a pretty lengthy legal document. It says, I represent and warrant that I delivered all evidence giving rise to the surveillance video recording. I represent there are no duplicates, backups, stored drives. I have permanently deleted all texts and other communications. And so Eddie was explaining that he signed this NDA on March 7th of 2016, but another point is that Eddie, who again is around 24 years old around this time, said that he didn't even read the entire document, and he didn't even get a copy of this document even after the fact, after he had signed it. And so we saw another NDA, but this NDA from Combs Enterprise, and it was an agreement on November 6th of 2015, but as the government pointed out, that date was completely wrong because it was supposed to be on March 7th of 2016, but for this particular NDA, it also read something along the lines of, recipient understands that Combs is a highly prominent recording artist and entertainer. Recipient agrees to pay $1 million as liquidated damages if in breach of agreement. And so what the government did is they tried to point out, you know, like Eddie Garcia around this time, again, 24 years old, but also at this time making $10.50 an hour. So how could he come up with $1 million if he was in breach of this agreement? payment. But Eddie did sign this non-disclosure agreement too. He said, kind of similar to the other NDA that he signed, that he didn't read this document either, and said that the reason he didn't read this was because the goal was to get out of there ASAP. And so afterwards, after he signed the NDAs, Diddy grabbed the NDAs, he left the room, but then when he returned with a brown paper bag and a money counter. And at first I thought the money counter was like an actual human or a person, but no, it's a machine, because when you're rich, you can just put a bunch of money into a money counter, and it was a lot of money, where Eddie was explaining it was stacks of $1,000 at a time, and in total it was $100,000 that was put in this money counter. And how does he know it was $100,000? He saw the display of the money counter at the end of the money count. And so Eddie Garcia explained that he actually took the extra money, and that Diddy's bodyguard was present during this meeting and present when this money was counted and present for the payment. And Christina Courtroom was also present during this counting of the money. Again, that being $100,000, a very large stack of money for sure. And after being handed the money, Eddie said that he got up to leave, and he was escorted out by Diddy and this bodyguard. And Eddie was explaining that he was nervous, but Diddy asked him how he'd spend the money and told him not to make big purchases. And then this was a point that was objected to by the defense. That objection was sustained, but that afterwards Diddy signed his valet ticket. But Eddie interpreted to this whole big purchases kind of comment as possibly a way that it wouldn't draw attention if he was to make a large purchase with this money that was in cash. And so that's where the objection was actually. But Eddie said that afterwards he drove off, and that he told Bill about the money, because again, Bill Medrano at this point had only requested $50,000, and he got that $50,000. Then Eddie got the $30,000, so there's $20,000 left, and that went to the other security guard, that being Henry Elias. And so what did Eddie Garcia do with this money? Well, he said that he bought a used car with it. So he said that he didn't report this cash on his taxes, and I think maybe that kind of played into the fifth or the immunity deal. But Eddie said that a week or two later that the incident report and the video were missing from the folder, and that Diddy contacted Eddie around Easter saying Happy Easter, God is good, and asked if anyone had inquired about this particular incident. So again, this happened in March, and Diddy even at Easter was still thinking about it on his mind, even sending a message to Eddie asking him whether or not someone was asking about what happened. And so Eddie explained that no one had inquired about the incident, and that Diddy ended this call with saying that if Eddie needed anything, that he should let Diddy know. And so Eddie asked something from Diddy a couple years later, or just a year or two later, around 2017, 2018. He couldn't remember the date, but he asked to work for Diddy as far as working with him in security, and he reached out to Diddy through Instagram. However, Diddy didn't reply to this message. And then from Eddie's standpoint, he said he didn't think about the video, think about it, recollect this video, until he saw it on a media outlet, and we presume that media outlet to possibly be CNN or possibly the other outlets, including ourselves, who also released the video right when it was first released. And he said that he later learned of other copies of this video by Officer Israel Flores, and that Eddie Garcia deleted the text message he had with his friend, again, that being Officer Flores, about the incident. He said that he deleted the text messages between him and Henry Elias, the other security guard, and said that he just wanted nothing to do with it. And so he met with the government in June of 2024 after this video was released, after it went public, but he didn't tell the government about deleting the video during their initial meeting. He didn't reveal this piece of information until his second meeting with the government, after he wasn't being represented by the Securitas legal counsel anymore. He got his own attorney, and then that's when he revealed to prosecutors, or federal prosecutors I should say, just everything that had happened with this particular video.
Oh, I could see why he wanted some protection, right? Deleted messages, didn't report it on his taxes, allegedly lied to police. I mean, that's a problem. That's a problem. But key witness, and it goes to the idea of credibility. Clearly, he doesn't want to testify. Clearly, he's incriminating himself. But, he has that protection to talk about it. Again, goes to, I believe, the bribery allegation, maybe even obstruction, this idea of why it's so important for the racketeering charge. And he mentioned Christina I've been saying Christina Coram. You say Christina Coram. I'm not in, you know better than me. But I believe she's going to have to testify. She's been talked about so many times during the course of this trial about what her involvement in Sean Combs' operations were, whether or not she was facilitating any of these alleged crimes, whether she was a knowing or unknowing co-conspirator. Again, racketeering conspiracy. He couldn't have just agreed to further a criminal enterprise or further, racketeering activity or a pattern of crimes. He can't do it by himself. He had to have a co-conspirator. Is she the person? Are they saving her for the end? So it's very interesting that he mentioned her. Now, very curious to see what the defense was going to do under cross-examination. I mean, what can they cross him about? What can they question him about? Now, I understand he was questioned. I also understand they didn't ask him a lot of questions, right? What was the focus of the cross-examination of Eddie Garcia by Sean Combs' defense counsel?
Yeah, and to your point, Jesse, the cross-examination went pretty quick. And also to your point, I was wondering where it would go, as I always do with the cross-examination sometimes. But just as far as Brian Steele doing this cross-exam, because he was the one who did it on behalf of the defense, he was asking Eddie just about how Diddy was professional with him during this meeting where there was an exchangement of cash. The defense was saying that Eddie was truthful about getting more money than was requested because, again, Bill Medrano just requested the $50,000. However, Eddie revealed not only to us in the public, but also to the jurors that he took a little bit of cash too, $30,000, even more than Henry Elias went home with when he only went home with $20,000. And so we saw the exhibit of the NDA again. And so then as far as the questioning from the defense, it really kind of touched upon the exclusions from the NDA, which read, a disclosure of confidential information in response to valid order by a court or other government body, or B, as otherwise required by law, will not be a breach of this agreement or a waiver of confidentiality for other purposes. However, that recipient provides prompt prior written notice thereof to company to enable company to seek protective order or otherwise prevent the disclosure. And so then we saw another exhibit, and this was kind of a zoomed in version of the non-disparagement portion of the NDA, where we just kind of saw that you're not to disparage Combs or Combs Enterprise, that type of thing. And then it really just kind of went by quickly where Brian Steele had asked Eddie Garcia whether or not he went to law enforcement about this incident, and Eddie responded that he didn't go to law enforcement at first about this incident. And so I was kind of like, okay, that's kind of a weird place to end, but that's really just where the cross-examination ended. However, on the redirect, I kind of understood why they were asking this. And so the redirect goes back to the Combs Enterprise NDA, the exclusions from the NDA again, where that portion where it says, however, that recipient provides prompt prior written notice thereof to company to enable company to seek protective order or otherwise prevent the disclosure. And so Eddie revealed on his redirect he did go to law enforcement. It just wasn't LAPD or local police officers. Instead, it was to federal agents when he had met with the government about this case.
And I think the defense was trying to say, hey, you could have spoken to authorities. We're not trying to keep this from a criminal prosecution. We're not trying to cover up evidence of a crime. He's a celebrity. He has a girlfriend. He didn't want it to get out into the open. That's simply what it is. NDAs are not foreign to celebrities. And if he really needed to tell the truth to authorities, this piece of paperwork was not going to prevent him from doing so. Sean Combs was not preventing him from doing so. Hey, the $100,000 was not a bribe. It was a payment to say thank you for what you did. Okay, might have been maybe a stretch or not. By the way, before we go into the testimony of Derek Ferguson, which I think is really important, we talk about money trail. I understand that Christina Coram's phones were seized as well, right? Didn't we get a confirmation of that? Which, again, makes me think why she might have to testify.
So we did learn even previously that a Homeland Security investigator did also seize Christina Coram's phone even prior to what we saw from the exhibit of the stipulation. So the jury was present for this. However, there was no witness on the stand, but what the prosecution did was show up an exhibit about a stipulation about seizing Christina's cell phone and extracting the contents of her phone too. And so what we learned from this is that there were 24 contacts in this particular phone and that Christina had contacted included Eddie My Angel as well as Eddie Intercontinental Hotel. And then we see an exhibit of Eddie Garcia, Henry Elias's and Bill Medrano's ID. And then that kind of wrapped up the stipulation portion. But it does seem that they are kind of gearing up for her to testify, because she has been mentioned at length a number of times throughout testimony, throughout this trial so far. And so I feel like it's only a matter of possibly days for her to possibly take the stand. Now, the government hasn't said that she is going to be taking the stand definitely yet, but I think we can possibly expect that. And I feel like she'll be a huge key witness for them if she does take the stand for them, for the government.
So now let's talk about Derek Ferguson. Okay, so he takes the stand next. What was his exact position, and what did you learn about the company's finances? I mean, the finances of the different Sean Combs businesses, how Combs got paid. So who is he, and what do we learn about the finances?
Yeah, so we learned about Derek Ferguson, who took the stand right after the stipulations had occurred, and he was questioned by AUSA Mary Slavic. And so while Derek was on the witness stand, he said that he did receive a subpoena to testify, so he was ordered to by the federal government. And then at the beginning of his testimony, he's shown an exhibit photo, this one being that photo of Sean Combs on a red carpet, and verified that it was Sean Combs, aka Puffy, PD, Love, that type of thing. And so Derek Ferguson worked with Diddy and his companies for a number of years, from 1998 until 2017. So that's a long period of time. And he's had a bunch of hats when he's worked with Diddy. He was the CFO of Bad Boy Entertainment from 1998 to 2012. He went on to be the chief growth officer, and then he was also the chief operating officer of Revolt. And so as far as his work with being the CFO, the chief financial officer, Derek had explained that he had overseen finances for the company. He was responsible for accounting and record keeping, and that Bad Boy was a collection of companies that were owned by none other than Mr. Sean Combs. And so he had explained that when he had first started over at Bad Boy, that it was just 3 or 4 who were working in the finance department, but then that department grew as Sean Combs' businesses grew, and that department grew from 3 to 4 people to about 10 people. And so he said his duties included setting budgets, receiving accounts that were receivable, but also accounts that were payable. He was in charge of deal making, and he managed Diddy's personal finances at time during his tenure. And so he explained that his supervisor varied kind of over the course of the many years that he had worked for Sean Combs, and said that sometimes it would either be the president of Bad Boy who he would report to, or it'd be Sean Combs directly who he would report to. And so he said contact with Diddy had decreased over time, and that Diddy was more like a chairman than involved into the day-to-day operations of his businesses. And so then we see exhibits of Paul Alford, who we know to be Uncle Paulie. However, when Derek Ferguson was on the stand today, he didn't know what Uncle Paulie or Paul Alford's nicknames was, so he just referred to him as Paul Alford. He said he interacted with Paul regularly. And then we see an exhibit photo of D-Rock and Roger Bonds, who were also security guards, and Derek had explained that he didn't interact with them, D-Rock and Roger Bonds, as frequently as he did with Paul Alford. And so then they kind of got into how whether or not that Derek had interacted with Diddy's assistants about scheduling, and that's what he said that was kind of the basis of his only interactions with Diddy's assistants. But then goes into that Diddy was the sole owner of Bad Boy Productions, that he did marketing, he did films, and that the record company was a little bit different from his other ventures, and that Derek Ferguson was explaining that some of Diddy's business ventures were partnerships, including the record company that was a partnership, but also Diddy's Sean John line was a partnership. But overall, Diddy's companies were very profitable, and that Diddy drew his salaries from the record company, from the clothing line, from Revolt, and it was determined with his business partners, Diddy's business partners, just as far as his salary was for the different businesses that he had, but also the operating agreement that was decided between the business partners. And so we kind of get into the banking and finance, where they were talking about just how Diddy would open up different bank accounts. So for example, Derek Ferguson was explaining that all of Diddy's companies had their own bank account, and that it was kind of standard structure for them to do it that way, and that the finance team oversaw these bank accounts. And the banks that were included Citibank, HSBC, LLC and Signature, and those were just some of the banks that were used. So then we see an exhibit of the bank opening document or a bank application, and this account title was to Janice Combs Music LLC. However, even though it's under Diddy's mother's name, technically with the LLC, it is something that was owned by Sean Combs, and that the address on this particular document was to the bad boy office. I think it was like 1710 Broadway, and that the account type was a checking account. And so I was kind of like, okay, where are we going with this? Where are we going with this? And we saw that Ferguson's initials were on this particular document, and that we saw kind of a zoomed in version of this document under the authorized signer section, where it was signed by not only Derek Ferguson but also Sean Combs. And Derek Ferguson was explaining that Janice Combs Music was an account used for providing name and likeness, and that the account was self-funding and it was a profitable company. And we saw an exhibit of another bank account application, this one for Combs Enterprises LLC. This account type was also a checking account, and Diddy and Derek Ferguson's signatures were on this account too. And this particular account number that ended in 619 was used for the Ciroc brand, and it didn't require funding. And so then they kind of get into the credit cards, how they were used for American Express. Invoices were paid for by expense forms with checks or wires, and that as far as cash is concerned, incoming cash was an industry standard. Artists were always paid in cash for their appearances, and that outgoing cash was a per diem. It was a cash per diem for projects. The process for incoming cash was cash receipts, forms handed to finance by the artist or the manager, and then the process for outgoing cash was handled through petty cash accounts or cash advances. And that the prosecution had asked, was Derek Ferguson aware of Diddy kind of having large sums of cash? And Derek Ferguson explained that he wasn't aware of this. And then they kind of got into Diddy's personal spending before we kind of got into the lunch break. And as far as just where I thought this was going, this line of questioning was going, I had no idea at the first half, but it was the second half where I was kind of like, oh, okay, I can see where the prosecution was kind of going with this. It just kind of took a while to get there a little bit.
So I think it's relevant to establish some building blocks, right? So they're a building block trying to understand the finances of his companies, trying to understand the finances of Sean Combs, whether or not he had cash on him, in order to determine what was he doing with the payments. Was he using payments to further criminal activity, to pay for the freak-offs, right? And, you know, it comes up later, and we'll talk about it with Cross. But remember, with racketeering, if we're talking about a criminal enterprise, the flow of money is very important, particularly if the prosecution is arguing or will argue that that Combs was using the business's resources not only to further criminal activity, but was the racketeering activity, all of this criminal activity, was it benefiting him? Was it benefiting his businesses, right? Criminal enterprise, common purpose. So before we get to the Cross, there was a lot of discussion regarding internal transfers, right? Some of where the money was being paid, including a $20,000 transfer that I think is quite important based on what we've heard from prior testimony, right? So what did we learn about these transfers?
And again, to your point, Jesse, I feel like sometimes when we're inside that courtroom, I'm just like, where is this going? And then when I saw these transfers and the dates of these transfers, then it really kind of clicked into my head. But it was kind of a slow burn process from the prosecution to really kind of get to the point, in addition to the points that were made at the beginning of Derek Ferguson's testimony. So we see a number of exhibits. This is post-lunch break. We see a bank account application for Diddy's Alpine, New Jersey property. We see a bank account statement for the Alpine, New Jersey property, a statement from December 1st of 2011 through December 31st of 2011. So in this summary, it says beginning balance, credits, debits, ending balance. And so Derek Ferguson was explaining in this particular statement that $3.4 million went into this account. A lot of money, Jesse, just for the month of December of 2011. There's a lot of money, but also that $3.2 million went out of this account. And so we saw internal transfers from specific dates. So there were two dates at first, December 1st and December 2nd, again, of 2011, where there were internal transfers of $200,000 and $50,000 to Janice Combs LLC. Then we saw more internal transfers, these ones from December 5th, December 6th, and December 9th, of $865,000 for 207 Anderson LLC. That's his Alpine, New Jersey property. And so I kind of have been writing notes to myself. I'm like so confused on where this was going. But then Derek Ferguson is asked who decides to initiate internal transfers. And he responded that it's the controller who worked for Bad Boy. Then we see a statement again from December 1st to December 31st of 2011, but outgoing transfers from December 14th, where the description says outgoing wire transfer, and this one being to Cassie. It was for $20,000. And then I think the big one was on December 23rd of 2011. So again, this was around the time that Cassie Ventura had sent this email to Capricorn Clark, to her mother, explaining that Diddy was threatening to release sexually explicit videos of her. So when I saw December 3rd, 2011, then that date really kind of clicked to me. And what do we see? We see an incoming wire transfer from Roderick Ventura for $20,000, who we believe to be Cassie's father. And then we see a transaction December 27th of 2011 where it says outgoing wire transfer for return of funds to Charter Oak Grove. And so Derek Ferguson was explaining that he wasn't involved in this particular transfer. And again, he was talking about how he left in 2017, only kept in touch for birthdays and holidays. But even before we get to after Derek Ferguson had left, just around this time frame of 2011, this was around the time where when Cassie's mother took the stand that she had explained that she had taken out $20,000 to send to Diddy because she believed that her daughter's sexually explicit videos were going to be released. And so what ended up happening, as we know now, is that this money was sent back into the Ventura parents back into their account. So they got that money back, and we did see that outgoing wire transfer was sent just 4 days later from when it was initially transferred. And so then we kind of get to the end of Derek Ferguson's direct testimony, where he was asked whether or not that Diddy had, he had spoken to Diddy recently, and he explained that the last time Diddy texted him was pretty recently, and it was in September of 2024. I say recently, but it was almost a year ago at this point. But he had texted him on September 16th of 2024 and asked Derek, hello, can you give me a call? And that Diddy just wanted advice from Derek Ferguson as far as why he was reaching out. But Ferguson wasn't in New York around this time period. Diddy was in New York, as we all know why he was in New York, but that he just didn't end up responding to his message. And that kind of wrapped up his direct testimony, just as far as what he had seen financially from Diddy.
So very important stuff there, right? So obviously the money backs up the account of Regina Ventura. It backs up what, that whole back and forth about how the money was transferred and why it was transferred and how it was given back. But, to reach out to him the day, I think you said the day of his arrest, right? I think that was when he might have known that he was about to be arrested, wanted to know a little bit more about his finances. Or maybe he, if you believe the prosecution, he's not the first witness he contacted after Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, after an investigation was opened. Did he want to get some stories straight? Was he, trying to influence potential witnesses? That's an allegation I think the prosecution may be making. Because for him to reach out to who's a critical witness talking about the flow of money and finances, it's interesting to say the least. Now, the cross-examination by attorney Mark Agnifilo was, I think, very, very important for a number of different reasons. And there were parts of it I want you to get into about what you think he was doing and where he was going, because towards the end of the cross-examination, he was pretty straightforward with the questions he was asking him, right? And we'll get into that. If anybody had any questions about what the cross-examination was about, it was definitely illuminated at the end, and we'll talk about it. But where did he go in his cross-examination? What was he questioning Derek Ferguson about?
Yeah, so Mark Agnifilo, he has this style of just very, I think, not casual, but very kind of welcoming, I would say, to the witnesses that he's cross-examining cross-examining where he's like, hi, I'm Mark Agnifilo. I don't believe we've met. He kind of starts his cross-examinations in just that type of tone. And so what I think he was trying to do is kind of really establish that Derek Ferguson had worked for Diddy for a number of years and wanted to kind of get to the meat of what he saw while he was on the job. Because again, working from 1998 to 2017, that's a long period of time. And so the defense was first asking Derek whether or where he had went to school. He went to school at UPenn. He grew up in the Bronx, and that Derek Ferguson had gone on to Harvard Business School, graduating in 1990. So kind of building up just his resume in a way, it seemed like. And that after graduating from college back then, that he went on to work at a magazine, then went on to work for Burleson. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, but this particular company owns part of Bad Boy. And so then Ferguson is asked, can Mr. Combs do what he wants with Aerostar, which I guess he's like, it kind of falls under that umbrella where they're just 50% owners with one another, just essentially one of Diddy's business partners. And Derek Ferguson was explaining no, and that these operating agreements are always drafted and written up by lawyers. And then Mark Agnifilo asked, why did you want to work at Bad Boy? And Derek Ferguson, like a lot of the other employees that have testified so far in this trial, was kind of explaining that they needed more companies that were hiring people from the community, because again, he grew up in the Bronx around this time, and that you could kind of make a name for yourself, be a high-level executive, and that Bad Boy was giving a lot of opportunities for very hungry people who just kind of wanted to come up in the ranks around this time period. So then Mark Agnifilo is kind of asking about the onboarding process for Bad Boy, how the interviews went. And Derek Ferguson was explaining that they were fairly normal for a small company. He said he doesn't remember interviewing with Vashta, who worked at HR around this time. However, he did do an interview with Benny Medina, who was the former president of Bad Boy. And notably, Benny Medina also represents J-Lo. He not represents like an illegal matter, but represents J-Lo as far as her manager goes. And I think at one point even represented Tyra Banks as a manager. Just a little fun fact there. But Mark Agnifilo was kind of asking about the specific time frames from 1998 to 2012, where more businesses were being added, and that Diddy's business ventures all together were just growing, and that even as far as the record company goes for Bad Boy Music, that there was kind of this move from, records, that hard copy and CDs, tapes, that type of thing way back when, to digital music. And that because of this, recording companies kind of shrunk in terms of profits. But then Ferguson was explaining that when he had started, he had worked with Benny Medina, who again was at that time the former president of Bad Boy, and that then they start to kind of get into Diageo a little bit, and that's where I was kind of like, okay, where are we going with this? Why is Diageo being brought up in this? But I think what the defense was trying to do was kind of point out a little bit of why Diddy might be suing Diageo, or was suing Diageo, and that was, did you observe Diageo marketing Combs's liquor brands to certain demographics? And Derek Ferguson responded that the facts were their distribution was concentrated, and he said that it was concentrated in an urban area, and that was something that Diddy in his suit against Diageo at the time had explained, that he had felt racial discrimination because he wanted to expand it a little bit more beyond just the certain concentrated markets, as Derek Ferguson pointed it out to be. I just wanted to expand it beyond what kind of Diageo was giving to them. And so I was kind of like, okay, where are we going to go next with this? And so then the defense was asking about Revolt Films and their investment. And so to me, what it kind of signaled is, okay, are they kind of trying to talk about Mia in this sense? I didn't know kind of where they were going with this, because then they start bringing out a whole bunch of organizational charts. And these ones in particular we saw were the Revolt organizational charts, July of 2016. So we see an executive group for Revolt, including Derek Ferguson, who was the chief operating officer at that time, but Diddy wasn't in the executive chart in this particular one. We see the ad sales chart, we see pricing, planning, traffic chart, we see the integrating marketing chart, we see the distribution, affiliate, and consumer marketing chart, we see the production, creative, production, post-production chart. So we saw a whole bunch of charts. And then we see the Combs Enterprise organizational chart. And this was a photo of just all the leadership teams, which included Derek Ferguson, which included Diddy as the chairman and CEO. It included Diddy's sister Keisha, who is the director of philanthropy. And it included the finance team of Tony Abrahams, who took on the role of being the chief financial officer. And Derek Ferguson had explained that he kind of pulled Tony Abrahams up into the ranks around this time, that they both went to Harvard together. The press had thought Tony Abrahams was supposed to be testifying soon. The government had pointed out his name, I think, a couple days ago, but then he hasn't come to the stand yet. So possibly we could be anticipating his testimony too. But then the defense started to kind of get into the personal versus the business expenses, and that Derek Ferguson never saw Diddy sit with the statement and necessarily circle what was business or what was personal. It was always the finance department's job to do this every month. They looked to determine what was business and what was personal. And then Derek Ferguson kind of talks about the tax issue and whether or not the taxes were done correctly. And he explained during his tenure that the taxes were always done correctly.
So to me, it seems like they were saying, look, Combs couldn't just do what he wanted to do with this money. It's complicated. BMG owned Arista, 50% of Bad Boy. Couldn't just use the company's resources to do whatever he wanted. That Mr. Ferguson wasn't just hired by Sean Combs, maybe to be his guy to do his bidding and further this criminal activity. That Combs wasn't looking around and sitting there looking at the Amex bill and how everything was being used and covered up. Because again, these were businesses that, and this is what I took away from the testimony, that when they're entered into partnerships, everything was an open book. If this really was a criminal enterprise, if he was using the resources to further criminal activity, wouldn't he have tried to keep it hidden? Wouldn't it have been found out? I think that was the biggest takeaway for me. But again, as I said, if anybody was confused about it, towards the end, didn't Agnifilo ask him straight up, did you see anybody commit any crimes, or did it benefit the company in any which way?
Yeah. And so Mark Agnifilo, really towards the tail end of the cross-examination, was just like, well, you didn't see Mr. Combs commit any crimes. Derek Ferguson said no. Any threats? No. Any violence? No. Any emotional, physical, or sexual abuse? Diddy's over there nodding at the defense table like, yes, but Derek Ferguson said no, he didn't witness any of this. Mark Agnifilo asked, did you see any acts of prostitution during your 19-year work period or your work tenure? And Derek Ferguson said he didn't see any of that. And so Ferguson had explained that he had texted Diddy even after, because, you know, the defense kind of likes to point out that the employees, a lot of the former staff, always kind of send well wishes to Diddy even after the fact, even after they're no longer working just within the Combs enterprise, and that Derek Ferguson said that he did learn a lot from Diddy, and that they were talking about kind of how Diddy showed him the difference, or that Derek Ferguson showed Diddy the difference between being great and being the greatest, and the difference is just caring about people. And then I thought what was interesting, though, towards the tail end of the cross-examination, though, Jesse, is that the defense asked Derek Ferguson, how does he feel about Diddy today, given these criminal proceedings, given that he's testifying even in his federal criminal trial. And then there was just really this long pause, and to the point where a lot of us with our notebooks were like, okay, what's the answer going to be? There was a long pause, and Derek Ferguson said that he just didn't know how to answer that question, and that was his answer to the question. He didn't know how to answer that question. And so that's when the cross-examination ended. They go into the redirect, and that's when they kind of bring in just about Revolt Films, and then they bring in this portion of the organizational chart that the defense didn't point out, and that was where you could see that Mia was the director of development and acquisition. Christina Coram was the director office of the chairman, points out Derek Roche, D-Rock, Hakeem the driver, Paul Alford, who we know to be Uncle Paulie. And then he was asked whether or not that because he had been working out of the New York office, because he was based in New York, whether or not he saw Diddy in hotel rooms or at Diddy's home. And Derek Ferguson said that he didn't see him, in his hotels or at his home. And so what Mark Agnifilo did under the recross was, well, the CFO doesn't need to see Diddy or Sean Combs at a hotel. They don't need to see him at his home because it's his personal time. And I think the defense is kind of trying to have that ending point there. And then there was an objection from the government. That objection was sustained. And then Derek Ferguson was off the witness stand after.
Yeah, look, I think what they're trying to do, and I think effectively, even with him not having a response to that question, is if he really was Sean Combs, financial guy, right, the CFO of a criminal enterprise, his answer might have been a little bit different to that. He would have been maybe more aware of what was going on and maybe tried to insulate himself and insulate Combs. But if the jury says he looks shocked at what's going on, then maybe he never saw evidence of a crime. Maybe the money wasn't being used to further criminal activity. So his lack of a response can actually be used by the defense, that these charges were just as shocking to him as they are to our client. And like he said, if this was a criminal enterprise, none of these alleged crimes are actually benefiting the company. Although I think the way that the prosecution has categorized it is, as long as Sean Combs is being benefited, as long as his sexual desires are being benefited, as long as everybody agrees that's what the common purpose of this criminal enterprise, that might be the key there. So listen, a lot of testimony. We know Jane Doe is going to take the stand. That's going to be huge. We also know that Brianna Bongolan is probably going to take the stand. This is the person that Combs allegedly dangled off of Cassie Ventura's, deck. So that'll be really important as we talk about a pattern of abuse towards women, corroborating Cassie's testimony and others' testimony. So really, really interesting. Elizabeth, I know that was a lot of information and a lot of details, but appreciate you taking the time and great reporting as always.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.
Now to the Sean Combs sex trafficking trial. Enters a fourth week of testimony as we hear from Suge Knight, Combs' rap rival whose name has come up often at the trial. Dan Abrams is standing by. We're going to talk to him after Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katursky gives us this report from the courthouse. Good morning, Aaron.
And good morning to you, George. Long before federal prosecutors put Sean Combs on trial here, his chief hip-hop competitor told us that Combs was known in the industry for some of the very conduct that could now put him in prison.
Can't nobody hold me down. Oh, no.
This morning, as a fourth week of testimony begins in the Sean Combs trial in New York, his West Coast rival and Death Row Records founder Suge Knight is speaking out from behind bars in California, telling ABC News Combs' sexual appetites were an open secret beginning in the 1990s.
Everybody knew that Puffy didn't just pop in the industry and say, hey, I want to have sex with everybody.
The rivalry between Combs and Knight, notoriously marked by the shooting deaths of Biggie Smalls and Knight's artist Tupac Shakur, has come up at trial. Capricorn Clark became Combs' assistant after working for Knight and testified that on her first day, Combs took her to Central Park. He told me he didn't know that I had anything to do with Suge Knight, and if anything happened, he would have to kill me.
A lot of people might say, well, Capricorn could have did anything else she wanted to do. She did try. If you go get a job at Universal and probably make a phone call, you're not getting that job. If you go get a job at a talent agency or in the movie business and probably make that call, your career is over.
Knight has come up during trial at least 50 times. Another former assistant, David James, testified he once spotted Knight at Mel's Diner in Los Angeles and was then forced to accompany Combs, who he said was armed, to confront him.
If there's anything suggesting that I was doing anything illegal, I'm going to say definitely not.
Knight, who spoke to us from a California prison where he's serving time for a fatal hit and run, expressed some sympathy for Combs.
I don't feel that they should take Puffy and lock him up and throw away the key. I think he can do so much good right now. Him telling the truth about the industry.
And despite their long-standing rivalry, Suge Knight told us he does not hate Sean Combs. Now, a new week of testimony begins here this morning with Combs' former assistant testifying under the pseudonym Mia, back on the witness stand and under cross-examination. Guys?
Okay, Aaron, let's bring in Dan Abrams for more on this. Suge Knight, important witness for prosecutor.
Look, Suge Knight is basically saying at this point, from behind bars, you have to understand there's more context here. He's not the only one who was doing things like that. He's sort of walking a very fine line, suggesting that he should testify, right? Diddy's not going to testify in this case. And I don't know that I would take legal advice from Suge Knight from behind bars right now. But, you know, it is interesting when you look at the context more culturally of the hip-hop world to listen to Suge Knight. I think it's less significant with regard to the actual trial.
Well, how successful have prosecutors been in proving racketeering and sex trafficking?
More successful than I thought they were going to be. I mean, when we talked about this early in the case, I was talking about how hard the RICO, the racketeering part, was going to be. But you're seeing now witness after witness come forward talking about his employees assisting in this, right? Now you have the enterprise. The enterprise is the people who work for him doing the things he's telling them to do. And then you have potential crime after crime after crime that's being alleged, which is everything from kidnapping and arson to extortion, et cetera. And you were asking me a moment ago, Michael, but, you know, wait a sec. Have they necessarily proved each and every one of these? And that's going to be the question, right? That's going to be the question that has to be addressed is there enough proof to say that there was an arson, for example? It wasn't proved in court. Has it in another case, meaning, so has it been proved here?
And who else does the prosecution then need to put on the stand to prove all of this?
Well, so they have another victim, another critical victim who's going to come forward, an ex-girlfriend of his who's going to testify. And I think, again, you're going to see the same kind of defense that we've seen in each one of these, which is, again and again, it's you came back, you didn't complain at the time, and why would you write all these positive things about him in the meantime? So you're going to see similar defenses throughout with regard to these witnesses.
All right, Dan Abrams, thank you as always, my friend. Appreciate you.
Good evening, I'm Mike Marzo as we start another week in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Today included a contentious cross-examination of the woman who worked as a personal assistant to Combs. The defense seeking to chip away at her claims of abuse by showing social media posts filled with flattering descriptions of Combs. In just a minute, we're going to be joined by ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona to dig deeper into everything that unfolded in court. But first up with a recap, here's Darla Miles.
The jury in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial, instructed every day not to discuss the case with each other nor anyone else, seemed to be chatting about something, exchanging glances, some even snickering during the third day of testimony of Combs' former personal assistant testifying under the alias Mia. Defense attorney Brian Steele playing a 2013 birthday video she recorded for Combs to the jury. Puff Daddy, the living legend himself, you not only revolutionized the world, you revolutionized my world. Thank you for being one of the biggest inspirations in my life. I love you. Happy birthday. Jurors shown text messages Mia sent to Combs saying, Merry Christmas, I love you, and Happy New Year, always so much love to you. Steele unmercilessly demanding Mia to explain why she sent Combs such loving tributes during a time period she says her former boss was verbally, physically, and sexually abusive to her. Do you have any recordings of Mr. Combs berating you? Mia telling the court, no, I would not have been able to record it. Did you ever just pull out your phone and record him? Mia saying, absolutely not. Steele then asking, did you ever have any time to write a note to say, hey, Mr. Combs is sexually assaulting me? Mia answering no. During a break, when jurors were no longer in the courtroom, Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey telling the court, Mr. Steele has yelled at this witness. Mr. Steele has been sarcastic with this witness. Mr. Steele is argumentative with this witness. Given the tone, we want to stop the cross-examination of this witness. Her voice cracking with emotion, going on to say, victims in other cases are going to see how victims are treated. Our concern is that if this victim is not protected from further harassment, it will deter other victims in other cases. Now, after her third day of testimony, Mia's testimony has concluded in this trial. It will resume tomorrow morning with an employee from the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles.
Our thanks to Darla Miles for that recap. Let's pick right up where she left off as we're joined by ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona. It's interesting when they made that sort of argument for the judge outside of the jury that the cross-examination was basically just too tough. Is that really a legal argument, or is that just a subjective sort of analysis of the way that the defense was going at the witness?
It's not a legal argument. You have to think that the defense attorney has to argue vigorously for their client. Remember, their interest and their goal is to represent their client to the fullest. Their concern is not whether I'm going to break this witness that's on the stand or whether I'm hurting her feelings. They got to do what's best for the case, and that's exactly what Brian Steele was doing. Interestingly enough, so Ms. Comey, when she made this argument, it was out of the presence of the jury. At one point when she was making this argument to the judge, I was like, is she about to cry? Like her voice, like you could tell she was very emotional when she made that argument. And I have to say, yes, I understand as a former prosecutor, I was a prosecutor for 16 years. Yes, you do feel for your victims and for your witnesses. I think maybe she's a slightly too attached to these witnesses, and that's why she reacted the way she did and making this argument in front of the judge. But hey, in the end, Brian Steele was doing what was best and what was called for in the case. My question would be, if it was a female defense attorney, whether it would have been accepted the same way.
How do you think Mia did as far as a prosecution witness?
I think Mia did an okay job. So you got to think that Mia is a mixed bag. Why do I say that? Mia prepped with the prosecutor 27 times. She met with the prosecutor. That is a crazy amount of time to meet with an attorney to prepare your testimony. But you can tell why. Because she's a person that came to the prosecution as broken, a person that is just now coming under the realization that she was a victim and is a victim, and that she's dealing with trauma. Because you have to think, Mike, it wasn't until 2024 last year that it was the first time, according to her, that she ever told anyone that she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs. So that was a big revelation, and she's dealing now with the aftermath of being able to accept that. And you can tell at times, because anytime she's ever asked about that on the stand doing direct and doing cross-examination, there's a huge pause, and where she like sinks into her chair, it's almost like she wants to go underneath the witness stand. So that's hard. But in terms of how she did, she gave the prosecution what she needed to in terms of the forced labor, the witness tampering, witness intimidation, and in terms of the coercion of how Sean Combs intimidated her, bringing up what happened, the sexual encounter that they had, and holding that over her head. In terms of the defense, they put all their eggs in one basket in the sense of they were going right in, knee deep in, having to deal with her social media posts and pretty much calling her a liar, that she made up all of this, the sex never happened, and that at no point was she berated by Sean Combs.
Saying you had every opportunity to raise a red flag.
Victim blaming. So that may turn off the jury. So we don't know what's in the mind of the juries and how they accepted that, because you're actually victim blaming that she should have called someone for help. She should have called the cops. She should have told someone, should have told human resources. So we don't know how that's playing out, because remember, you had before her testimony, a few witnesses back, you had Dr. Hughes who testified as to the demeanor and how people react when they are victims of such type of behavior.
A lot to analyze there for the jury.
Yes, and she even analyzed herself. She was like, according to my therapist.
She did,
yes,
right.
And she said it many times. I'm not a psychologist, but according to my therapist, these are the steps that you take.
Perhaps something she learned in those 27 sessions as she was preparing to testify. Let's talk about some of the other testimony that we heard today. We heard from this, what was it, somebody connected with that video from LA, from the horrific assault video of Cassie Ventura. There was somebody who requested immunity to testify. And we've talked about this. Anytime somebody testifies asking for immunity, sort of the red flag goes, what's going on here?
Something good that they have to give. So Eddie Garcia, out of the presence of the jury, was brought in and took the stand. And the prosecution asked Mr. Garcia that if you were to be called to testify, would you exercise your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? His answer was yes. Did you review an immunity agreement with your attorney? Yes. And at that time, Ms. Comey, I believe it was Ms. Comey, she asked the judge to actually sign the order giving him immunity. So why is this important? Again, when you get immunity, you get a free pass to whatever you're testifying to, with the exception of perjury, if you commit perjury. So the question is, what does Mr. Garcia have to give to the prosecution that is worth so much that you're willing to give this person a free pass for whatever crime that they can be implicated in? I'm delving in that we have the Intercontinental employee. He worked there at Intercontinental Hotel. Looking at the opening statement from the prosecutor, Someone was paid $100,000 to get rid of that video. So it's quite possible that this is a security guard that accepted $100,000 from someone on Sean Combs' team to have this videotape disappear. But again, we'll find out tomorrow because he'll be the first witness to testify.
So many pieces to this puzzle for the jury. You have big pieces like the Cassie Ventura testimony and the Mia testimony, but you have small pieces too with the person that you were just talking about.
And they all matter.
And
they all matter,
right? And so then if you're a juror and you've been sitting through this process already, which has already been long and there's more to go. We heard the reporting today from Darla that there's been some chatter from the jury. What do you make of that?
So, Mike, I've been inside of the courtroom, I believe, at least for 95% or 90% of the testimony inside of the main courtroom. So I get to see the faces of the jurors. And Darla actually at times is sitting right next to me. So we're seeing the same thing. So it happens that when the judge does a sidebar, meaning that he's talking to the attorneys on the side of the courtroom and the jurors are still inside of the jury box, the judge plays this white noise so they can't hear and the people in the back can't hear what is it that they are discussing. But while this is happening, it seems like the jurors are communicating with each other. Again, we don't know what they're communicating about. They can be talking about what's for lunch or what they plan on doing over the weekend.
But have you seen something like that?
I have, but you have to think, these people have been together for 3 weeks. I mean, this week marks 4 weeks. So they've gotten to know each other. There's a chemistry there, which is going to make jury deliberations very interesting because they're no longer strangers when they finally get to start talking about the case. But just remember, Mike, there's one thing of caution is that you hope that these jurors are not already talking about the case or about testimony, about evidence that they may have heard, because jurors are not allowed at any point to discuss anything having to deal with the trial with each other until the judge has given them the final jury instructions. Both sides have rested. They got the jury instructions. They got the verdict sheet. And then the judge is like, I now give you permission for all 12 of you to discuss the case. Because if that happens beforehand, you're risking a mistrial. You're risking that a juror or jurors may be taking off of the case and you bring in an alternate. That's if you can savor the remaining jurors. So that's a testy water to walk in. There hasn't been any mention by the prosecution or the defense yet. Again, if it's not on the record, it didn't happen, and neither side has brought up any of those concerns to the judge.
It will be interesting to see if that does play a role here. And just for people at home, 18 people of the jury are now hearing this case, and you're thinking, well, what about 12? Nobody knows who is going to be the actual sitting jury, right? I mean, or I guess, how would you describe that? They don't know if they're going to be part of the final 12?
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but usually it's the first 12 jurors, that were selected. That's going to be the sitting jury. The remaining 6 are alternate jurors, and they're in a specific order of alternate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And if something were to happen with one of the first 12, then
that's
they
correct.
would be brought in.
Then they can replace one. So, for example, in a case like this, I'm surprised that no one has called out and said I'm sick or had an emergency, because that's why you ultimately end up plucking one of the alternates and replacing that person.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens. Any big headlines that we should expect this week?
Well, to find out when supposedly Jane may be testifying this week. And remember, Jane is victim number 2, and she's one of the major pieces also of this trial. So it's not just Cassie, just how Cassie had a major piece. Jane is the second most important person, because there are 2 counts relating to her in terms of sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion, as well as transportation to engage in prostitution, and still also some of those predicate acts having to deal with the racketeering. But remember, when they end up calling Jane, we're going to go back into freak-off land and learn about those freak-offs, but now having to deal with Jane.
Again, more heavy, complicated, complex testimony for the jury to hear, and everybody else as well. Bernarda, always great to have your perspective.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate that. Court resumes tomorrow morning, so stay with Eyewitness News and ABC 7 NY for any new updates. We have a real-time blog, by the way. You can follow along what is happening in court all day, again, at ABC 7 NY.